Chapter 1359. That's strange. Fellow Taoist fan, could it be that only you could escape, and I should be buried in the South Kaiping? When Xiao Hua saw Fan Daomao, he felt relaxed. Although he said so, he had a smile on his face. Not at all, not at all. Fan Daomao was embarrassed. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please don't blame us." Fellow Taoist was besieged by the ice worms at the beginning, and was also ambushed by the disciples of the Black Spirit sect. I thought that even with our cultivation, it would be difficult to escape. Hee, fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm afraid that it bodes ill rather than well. Fellow Taoist Xiao. As they spoke, 3 people flew from the foot of the mountain. They were Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, Sun Fian, and only Yongshang was missing. Greetings, fellow Taoists. I was lucky to escape with my life. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and greeted. Ai, not bad, not bad. Li Xiaowen returned the greeting and said, in such a dangerous situation, fellow Taoist Xiao was actually able to escape, very good. Then he looked around and said, fellow Taoist Xiao, you also saw the situation last night. In the ice worm swarm, we couldn't even take care of ourselves, so it was difficult for us to help you. Please forgive us. Xiao Hua shook his head and said with a smile, I already said last night that in the South Kaiping, I will be careful. If there is any accident, I won't dare to implicate you. Whether I stay in the valley or escape outside, it's I's business. It's not your fault. Then he looked around and asked with concern, that? Fellow Taoist Yong, did you stay in the valley? Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly and told him what happened. It turned out that after Li Xiaowen and the other 4 were discovered by the ice worms, they tried their best to escape. However, their flying speed was not as good as the ice worms, and they were not as skillful as Xiao Hua. Therefore, they could only rely on the yellow talismans in their storage bags to disperse the ice worms while trying their best to escape from the valley. In that situation, no one had the time to look at each other. When they escaped from the South Kaiping, they found that Xiao Hua and Yongshang were missing. There was no need to talk about Xiao Hua. When they were escaping from the southern Kaiping, they had already seen Xiao Hua throw out an incomparably powerful fireball talisman and be besieged by a swarm of ice worms. In their impression, with Xiao Hua's cultivation, there was no way he could survive. But what about Yongshang? Based on everyone's memories, it seemed that Yongshang had followed behind them and escaped together. As for where and when he disappeared, no one knew. Although the 4 of them managed to escape with their lives, which could be considered a great fortune, but another problem appeared. Apart from Fan Daomao's silk bag, which had already been used, Xiao Hua and Yongshang's silk bags had not been used. Without these 2 people's silk bags, no one would know where the final location would be, and the so-called cultivation technique and treasure would naturally be hopeless. Actually, when they saw Xiao Hua being besieged by the ice worms, they had already somewhat given up in their hearts. However, the 4 of them still waited here, hoping that after Fan Daomao came out, the 5 of them would discuss what to do. But what shocked them was that the one who came out wasn't Fan Daomao, but Xiao Hua, who they thought had long been frozen into an icicle. Spirit Husbandry Sect? When Xiao Hua heard Li Xiaowen's description, he couldn't help but be stunned. He asked curiously, those 2 short and fat cultivators were from Spirit Husbandry Sect? 2 Spirit Husbandry Sect disciples? Fu Shu asked curiously, not just one. Oh, that's right. When Xiao Hua heard this, he knew that he had let it slip. When he was ambushed by the 2nd Spirit Husbandry Sect disciple, Li Xiaowen and the rest had already escaped. What they saw was only the 1st Spirit Husbandry Sect disciple. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said with a smile, when I escaped from the southern color plane, I saw the cultivator who controlled the red flying insects and the other short and fat cultivator being frozen in the icicle. That's how I knew that they were 2 Spirit Husbandry Sect disciples. I see. Fu Shu nodded slightly. That's right, fellow Taoist Xiao. Sun Fian, who had been silent all this while, said in a low voice, that, fellow Taoist, when you passed by the 2 Spirit Husbandry Sect disciples, did you see a black spirit storage bag? Spirit storage bag? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said with a smile, why is fellow Taoist Sun asking this? After hearing Xiao Hua's words, not only did Sun Fian's eyes light up, even Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, and Fan Daomao's eyes widened. Looks like fellow Taoist Xiao has seen this spirit storage bag before? Li Xiaowen said with a smile. Hee, fellow Taoist Li, are you also interested in this spirit storage bag? Xiao Hua asked ambiguously. Sun Fian changed from his previous wooden expression and said first, of course, a spirit storage bag is the foundation of carrying spiritual items, just like a spirit storage bag. It's just that a spirit storage bag is even more precious than a spirit storage bag. In the country of Shi, only the spirit husbandry sect and a few other sects that rear spiritual items have spirit storage bags. The other sects don't have them. I have always wanted to carry spiritual items, but I never had the chance to get one. So, if it's convenient for fellow Taoist Xiao to transfer it to this? Xiao Hua knew the use of the spirit storage bag and already understood where the red flying insects and pigeons came from. But he still faintly felt that there was something inappropriate about it. Seeing Xiao Hua hesitate, Sun Fian was even more certain of Xiao Hua's thoughts and said anxiously, fellow Taoist Xiao, I am willing to offer 30 supreme-grade spirit stones in exchange for this spirit storage bag. Fellow Taoist Sun, you want to exchange a mere 30 supreme-grade spirit stones for a spirit storage bag? Li Xiaowen said coldly, a spirit storage bag is much more precious than a spirit storage bag. I'm afraid it's not something that can be exchanged with these spirit stones, right? Sun Fian was a bit embarrassed and rubbed his hands. I know that this spirit storage bag is priceless, but we rogue cultivators have accumulated it for many years and used many methods, but it's only this many spirit stones. No matter how much more I have, I can't take it out. Xiao Hua's eyes swiveled. He was just about to refuse, but his gaze swept over and saw the eagerness in some people's eyes. His heart involuntarily shuddered, and he thought to himself, this spirit storage bag is admittedly good, but it's also a scourge. Leaving it with me will definitely arouse the covetous eyes of others. Why don't I exchange it for something else? I don't have any spirit items left. Thinking up to here, Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said with a smile, fellow Taoists, I's cultivation is shallow. To be honest, I haven't even heard of this spirit storage bag. If everyone is interested, I am naturally willing to take it out to exchange. Oh, that's great. Fu Shu clapped and said, does fellow Taoist Xiao have 2 spirit storage bags? Why don't we bid? Xiao Hua didn't hide it either and nodded, saying, I indeed picked up 2 spirit storage bags, but they were both empty. I even thought that they were spirit storage bags. In addition, I need cultivation techniques, spirit stones, and the like, but I don't need them for the time being. Cultivation techniques? When everyone heard that there were 2 spirit storage bags, they were delighted at first, but when they heard that Xiao Hua wanted cultivation techniques, they frowned again. For a moment, there was actually an awkward silence. Li Xiaowen looked at everyone and took the initiative to say, Sai, fellow Taoist Xiao, I am also an itinerant cultivator. Of course, I know what fellow Taoist lacks. But my heaven-forsaken cultivation technique can only be given to fellow Taoist Xiao by fellow Taoist Qin. We don't have the right to give it to you privately. Moreover, looking at the current situation, I'm afraid that we don't have the cultivation techniques that we obtained ourselves, so we also don't have the means to give it to you. Sai, that's right. Everyone also echoed. How about this? I know that fellow Taoist wants to learn the art of talisman crafting. I am not talented, but I'm willing to teach you with all my heart. What does fellow Taoist Xiao think? Li Xiaowen, who had never wanted to teach, put forward a very good condition. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua simply didn't care for such a condition. Thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua said, fellow Taoist Li's condition really moves I. However, fellow Taoist also wants to cultivate. How could I dare to always disturb you? How about this? If fellow Taoist Li has any talisman crafting ancient books that seem to have the same value as this spirit storage pouch, I will also exchange it. Li Xiaowen was somewhat hesitant. To tell the truth, if he were to take out 1 or 2 talisman crafting techniques, it simply wouldn't have the same value as the spirit storage pouch. There were also several people watching from the side, so he couldn't be stingy. Just as Li Xiaowen was hesitating, Sun Fian smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I don't have any talisman crafting techniques here. However, I do have a book on alchemy techniques." Alchemy techniques? Hearing this, Li Xiaowen was also astonished. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, the spirit storage pouch is admittedly precious, but it doesn't seem to be as precious as alchemy techniques, right?" "Sigh, I was precisely going to explain to fellow Taoist Xiao. I's alchemy techniques are also incomplete. I also plan to use a book on the basics of artifact crafting from the spirit storage pouch, as well as some spirit stones to exchange with fellow Taoist Xiao." Sun Fian said, "Artifact crafting?" Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, and he inwardly said, "This cultivation technique is admittedly not easy to find, but finding one on alchemy and artifact crafting is also not bad." Soon after, he nodded and said, "If fellow Taoist Sun has such a book, even if it's not a cultivation technique, I would be happy to exchange it." Fellow Taoist Xiao, Fu Shu and Fan Daomao were greatly anxious. They hurriedly called out to Xiao Hua, and also stated their conditions. Their things were also not bad, but unfortunately, it was not a cultivation technique, and it was also not to Xiao Hua's liking. They could only cup their hands and say, "Fellow Taoists, I only picked up 2 spirit storage pouches. For fellow Taoists will definitely be disappointed, so I can only pick up what I need to exchange it. Please forgive me, fellow Daomao." Fu Shu and Fan Daomao were very disappointed, but they also knew that what Xiao Hua said was the truth. On the other hand, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were very happy. Li Xiaowen gave Xiao Hua a book on talisman crafting techniques that he obtained. In addition, like Sun Fian, he also gave some top-grade spirit stones as additional compensation. However, how could Xiao Hua accept too many top-grade spirit stones in front of everyone? He only picked up 2 spirit stones of different attributes of the 5 elements. It's only 10 top-grade spirit stones. It shouldn't arouse the evil intentions of others, right? Xiao Hua thought without changing his expression. On the other hand, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were overjoyed. They put away the spirit stones that they took out and patted Xiao Hua's shoulder knowingly. After putting everything into his own storage pouch, Xiao Hua took out the 2 spirit storage pouches and handed them to Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. The 2 of them took them and carefully checked them before putting them into their sleeves. So it was just a guess about the spirit husbandry sect. Since we saw the spirit storage pouches, there's no doubt that the spirit husbandry sect was at that time. Those who commit evil deeds are doomed to destruction. The disciples of such a famous sect actually plotted against fellow Taoist Xiao. Naturally, they ended up being frozen into ice pillars by the ice worms. Sun Fian said with a smile. However, Sun Fian was slightly stunned. He looked at Xiao Hua with a strange expression and asked, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, since the 2 disciples of the spirit husbandry sect were frozen, how did you escape?" Chapter 1360. Looking at the strange expression on Sun Fian's face, Xiao Hua was very annoyed. He wished he could take out all the fireball talismans and smash them down. You say, this person usually keeps his mouth shut and doesn't say anything. Why is he so curious at this time? I gave you the spirit storage pouch and even gave you so many top-grade spirit stones. Why can't I shut your mouth? Xiao Hua thought to himself. Actually, this kind of question generally involved a cultivator's divine ability, so it was naturally secretive and not suitable to be asked. However, Xiao Hua's cultivation was low, and even though his magic power was deep, it was still not enough. In this group of cultivators, he always had the attitude of a junior. Sun Fian's way of asking, the meaning of concern was even more than probing. It was not particularly abrupt. I spoke too much? Sun Fian saw that Xiao Hua was somewhat hesitant and immediately cupped his hands in apology. However, his words had already been said and extremely successfully aroused the curiosity of Li Xiaowen and the others. What was the use of apologizing now? Xiao Hua cursed in his heart. His eyes turned, looked at everyone, and said with a smile, "Everyone, guess, how did I escape danger?" Guess? Sun Fian's eyes widened. He seemed to have heard such a funny answer for the first time. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't keep us in suspense. This is fellow Taoist's secret. Hehe, it's fine if you don't say it. Fu Shu said with a smile. At this time, we should be thinking about whether to continue waiting for fellow Taoist Yong here or look inside. Xiaohua was very happy in his heart. This Fu Shu is really funny. However, Li Xiaowen's brows did not relax because of Fu Shu's words. Instead, he looked at Xiaohua thoughtfully. Xiaohua very keenly sensed something was wrong and asked awkwardly, "Fellow Taoist Li, could it be that you guessed? Is this the reason?" Li Xiaowen thought for a moment, took out a yellow talisman, and handed it over. Xiaohua was slightly stunned. He reached out and took it. When he saw it clearly, his expression changed slightly. That yellow talisman was none other than the fireball talisman that Xiaohua refined. Hehe, fellow Taoist Xiao, did you rely on this strange fireball talisman to escape from the group of ice worms in the South Kaiping? Seeing Xiaohua's expression change, Li Xiaowen had a knowing expression and laughed. Xiaohua's thoughts turned rapidly, and his face changed into an extremely embarrassed expression. He said embarrassedly, "It's not I. I wanted to take it out the day before yesterday, but, Sai, you can't blame fellow Taoist Xiao for this." Li Xiaowen took the fireball talisman from Xiaohua's hand and said with a wry smile, "Even I occasionally came across this strange fireball talisman in Eg. I spent a lot of effort to buy a few. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Xiao to be so rich and overbearing, to buy so many." Xiaohua stared blankly and hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist Li misunderstood. When I bought it, it was very cheap." After thinking for a moment, Li Xiaowen nodded. "I think fellow Taoist bought it early. That's because the strangeness of this fireball talisman hasn't been discovered yet. Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Xiao, what are you talking about?" Fan Daomao asked curiously. "How come I don't understand?" Hehe, no wonder fellow Taoist Fan doesn't understand. Li Xiaowen explained with a smile. After listening for a moment, Xiaohua finally understood. It turned out that after Li Xiaowen got the news that he was going on a treasure hunt, he went to Eg to purchase the things he needed. He himself was a talisman master, and he also had some acquaintances in Eg. From those sellers, he learned that a very strange fireball talisman had recently appeared in Eg. The talisman paper and talisman ink used to refine these fireball talismans were all low-grade, but the talisman characters on the talisman paper seemed to be naturally formed. It was very obvious that the method of writing high-grade talismans was used on these low-grade fireball talismans. The strangest thing was that the power of these fireball talismans was really terrifying. They were directly comparable to the legendary fireball talismans of the highest grade. Li Xiaowen himself could also refine fireball talismans, but he could only refine low-grade fireball talismans using low-grade talisman paper and talisman ink. Even if he switched to mid-grade talisman paper and talisman ink, only a small portion of the fireball talismans refined would be of mid-grade. If he used high-grade talisman paper and talisman ink, there might be a chance to increase the quality of the fireball talismans to the mid-grade. However, Li Xiaowen wouldn't squander money and use high-grade talisman paper to refine low-grade fireball talismans. Therefore, Li Xiaowen was very curious about this fireball talisman. He found many sellers and spent a lot of spirit stones to buy several talismans. One was for research and the other was for collection. Even just now in the southern color plane, he only used 2 talismans in an extremely dangerous situation. This fireball talisman is really amazing. Li Xiaowen sighed with emotion. Just now when I used ordinary fireball talismans, or even yellow talismans like fire snake talismans, those ice worms could only be driven away. After a moment, they would chase after me again. However, the flames emitted by this fireball talisman could actually melt the ice worms. If I had a large amount of these fireball talismans, I would be able to calmly escape. I wouldn't be in such a difficult situation. Ah? There's actually such a bizarre fireball talisman? Sun Fian said in astonishment. Which expert refined this fireball talisman? When Xiaohua heard this, his heart violently beat. Li Xiaowen sighed with emotion. According to reliable sources, This fireball talisman is the work of 3 old monsters of the Ardent Fire Mountain. 3 old monsters of the Ardent Fire Mountain? Fan Daomao's eyes widened. Those are nascent soul stage cultivators. They were bored enough to refine this fireball talisman. For what? Nascent soul stage cultivators are all old monsters who have lived for who knows how many years. Moreover, their temperaments are all strange. Who knows what they're thinking? Maybe because they're idle and bored. Sun Fian said disdainfully. I also have some doubts. Li Xiaowen scratched his head and said, if they were bored and gave pointers to juniors, refining a few would be fine. But it said that EG has quite a few of these fireball talismans. These 3 old seniors can't always be refining these low-level yellow talismans, right? When Xiaohua heard this, he laughed and said, it's nothing. Maybe they've accumulated it for many years, and their disciples took it all out to exchange for spirit stones? And fellow Taoist Zhao's conjecture is quite reliable. Li Xiaowen nodded and asked again, when did fellow Taoist Zhao discover this fireball talisman? Long ago. I discovered it on EG a few days after I followed Senior Qing to Jingbo City. At that time, the price was very cheap. Xiaohua didn't conceal the time. No wonder fellow Taoist Xiao was very generous when he threw out these fireball talismans, as if he didn't feel any heartache. Li Xiaowen laughed. Xiaohua took out several fireball talismans from his storage pouch and handed them to the 4 people, saying, when I bought them, they weren't expensive to begin with. Naturally, I didn't feel any heartache. However, there aren't many left in the southern color plane that relied on them to blast open a path. Please kindly accept these, fellow Taoists. I's also very curious about such a miraculous fireball talisman. Sun Fian and the others very happily took them and carefully looked at them before putting them away in their storage pouches. They weren't talisman masters, so their understanding was limited. However, supreme-grade fireball talismans could save lives in certain situations. This was something they knew very well. All right, fellow Taoist Xiao, being able to escape was beyond our expectations. Our treasure hunt has increased by another percentage. Li Xiaowen clapped his hands and said, but next, should we continue to wait here for fellow Taoist Yong? Or should we go and provide support? Fu Shu had just asked this question, but now that Li Xiaowen brought it up again, everyone looked at each other, not saying a word more. The situation was very obvious. Even the 2nd-level qi condensation Xiaohua had flown out, but the 4th-level qi condensation Yongshang still hadn't come out. Was there any need to say what happened to Yongshang? Perhaps he'd already been frozen into an icicle. Waiting was definitely not a good strategy, so they could only go in and search. However, everyone had just escaped from inside and had almost lost their lives. Who would dare to go in again? However, if they didn't go in, they wouldn't be able to get Yongshang's silk bag, and they wouldn't be able to find the place arranged by Qing Fengmin. Giving up like this was admittedly something they weren't willing to do, but taking the risk of death was something they didn't dare to do even more. What should they do? The 5 people looked at each other and stared at each other. None of them spoke. After a long while, Fan Daomao sighed. Alas, what a pity. What's there to pity? If fellow Taoist goes, we're willing to. Fu Shu said halfway and smiled wryly. We can't go, and I don't have anything to promise. If it really doesn't work out, then you and I will disperse. Our Heavens Forsaken isn't the first time it's been organized. There will be opportunities in the future. It's still useful to keep our lives. Fan Daomao glanced at Fu Shu and shook his head. Fellow Taoist Fu misunderstands. What I pity is Yongshang. I heard this guy say that he just obtained a cultivation method. It said that it's an extremely powerful divine ability. It doesn't matter if he dies, but that cultivation method is only frozen in an icicle. It's really a waste of God's gift. Cultivation method? Xiaohua's heart jumped when he heard this, but he looked at Fan Daomao and didn't quite believe it. Fellow Taoist Fan, are you telling the truth? You're not deceiving everyone, right? Li Xiaowen said softly. Fan Daomao rolled his eyes at Li Xiaowen and said impatiently, fellow Taoist Li presumably knows about I's friendship with Yongshang. It's not strange for I to know about this kind of thing, right? And that's true. The two fellow Taoists are also inseparable from each other in Heaven's Forsaken. I can clearly see that this cultivation method is really a pity. Li Xiaowen sighed. Fellow Taoist Xiao, didn't you not have a suitable cultivation method? This thing seems to be extremely suitable for you. Sun Fian suddenly said. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. I want it, but I also need to cultivate it in my current life. That might not be the case. Fu Shu glanced at the valley behind him and said, I think that fellow Taoist Xiao has a chance to find that cultivation method. Strange, why is that? Li Xiaowen didn't wait for Xiao Hua to speak and asked. Fellow Taoist Li, you see, fellow Taoist Xiao was clearly lucky to escape from the southern color plains. Moreover, he has a fireball talisman in his storage bag that is very good against ice worms. Fellow Taoist Li only obtained this fireball talisman a few days ago, but fellow Taoist Xiao was actually able to purchase it a month ago. Presumably, he has some fate with the southern color plains. Say, if someone can enter the southern color plains, wouldn't fellow Taoist Xiao be the only one suitable? Chapter 1361. Hearing this, Xiao Hua sneered in his heart. He could still see through this little trick. Yes, fellow Taoist Fu's words are reasonable. Li Xiaowen nodded, but when he saw that Xiao Hua didn't bat an eyelid, he smiled and said, however, the South Kaiping is extremely dangerous. It's one thing to be able to escape, but fellow Taoist Xiao wouldn't risk his life for a cultivation technique that he doesn't even know exists. Don't you think so? Fellow Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoist Li is right. Xiao Hua smiled and didn't say anything else. How about this, fellow Taoist Xiao, if you can find fellow Taoist Yong's silk bag, fellow Taoist Yong's storage bag will belong to fellow Taoist Xiao. Everything inside, including the things abandoned by us, we can let fellow Taoist Xiao take them all. What do you think? Fan Daomao's eyes turned rapidly as he continued. Sun Fian shook his head. Fellow Taoist Fan is wrong. If fellow Taoist Xiao really finds the silk bag, that storage bag originally belonged to fellow Taoist Xiao. What right do we have to stop him? Then he looked at Xiao Hua and said, however, fellow Taoist Xiao, if you can get the silk bag after I find the treasure in the future, I'll give you 20% of it. What do you think? Fan Daomao and Fu Shu also echoed. We also have the same idea. Then, they looked at Li Xiaowen and said, fellow Taoist Li, how about we give fellow Taoist Xiao 20% of our things as well? This isn't impossible. Li Xiaowen looked at Xiao Hua and said, if you can really take out the silk bag, then you'll give us a second chance to find the treasure. It's only right that we give 20% of the things. Xiao Hua originally didn't want to pay attention to it, but seeing the four of them say so, he couldn't help but feel moved. These five escaped before me. They definitely didn't encounter the Iceworm King. It was just ordinary ice worms chasing them. Moreover, from what everyone said, Yong Shang seemed to have followed them for a long time. If he died, he wouldn't have been close to the canyon where the Iceworm King was. Li Xiaowen and company were probably chased by the iceworms and thought that the canyon was filled with iceworms. However, I was the last to fly out, so I didn't see any iceworms along the way. Even if there is a group of iceworms, as long as it is not the Iceworm King, I can still escape freely. Who would be afraid of them? Thinking of this, Xiao Hua looked at everyone and said with a smile, I had a hard time encountering Tianqi's operation, so of course I don't want to give up, but ice cultivation is still shallow, and escaping is already a fluke. I really don't want to sell my life for these treasures. If any fellow Taoist wishes to go, I am also willing to take out my 20%. Oh, and I will also gift the few fireball talismans I have to that fellow Taoist. Some treasures? Fu Shu smiled bitterly and said, fellow Taoist Xiao, 20% for each of us is already a lot. The share of the four of us is about the same as fellow Taoist Zhao's share. Fu Shu directly omitted Xiao Hua's last two sentences, looking very earnest and well-intentioned. How about this? Li Xiaowen said, if fellow Taoist Xiao is willing to go, each of us will take out 25% of the treasures to round it up to fellow Taoist Xiao. How about it? Very good, we agree. Of course, No one had any objections and looked at Xiaohua eagerly. Xiaohua scratched his chin with his finger and looked at the distant canyon entrance. After a long while, he sighed and said, "Alas, poor people have short ambitions. Who told I to not have a suitable cultivation method? Since that's the case, I will go." "Great." Everyone clapped their hands and praised. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, shouldn't you leave your silk bag behind first?" Fan Daomao probed. "If I can't come back, what's the use of taking 4 silk bags?" Xiaohua sneered. "Hee, fellow Taoist Xiao is right." Fan Daomao smiled and said no more. Since he had made up his mind to take the risk, Xiaohua asked Li Xiaowen for a connecting note talisman as well as a few other yellow talismans before flying towards the canyon. After Xiaohua flew away, Li Xiaowen and the others looked at each other. They all had the same thought in their eyes. Then, they all returned to the foothills and sat cross-legged, waiting quietly. Do you all think I am a fool?" Xiaohua slowly flew into the canyon. As he pondered, he sneered and said, "Everyone's cultivation is much higher than this poor Taoist's, but not a single one of them dares to come forward. Instead, you're tempting this young master with your words. Hee, I wonder who will be the one to benefit in the end." Xiaohua didn't fly very fast. After flying for a while, he saw that it was the same as when he came out. There was nothing special in the entire canyon. Unconsciously, his courage grew. He looked back and saw that there shouldn't be anyone following him, so he increased his speed and looked for the path he came out of. Because he was looking for Yongshang, and it was more likely that he was looking for Yongshang's corpse, Xiaohua flew very low and carefully looked at the bottom of the canyon. At this time, the sky was already bright. In the far eastern horizon, a red sun was gushing out from the sea of clouds. The entire world was full of vitality. Unlike the vitality in the early morning, the canyon Xiaohua was in was abnormally cold. The deeper he went, the more ice and frost he saw. Of course, there were also many strange spiritual herbs along the way. Xiaohua didn't care about them. As long as he could pick them, he would pick them and transplant them into the space. Just when Xiaohua was about to move a foot-tall spirit grass into the space, he suddenly remembered that he had placed the Ice Worm King's egg into the space last night. Could it be that the spirit grass inside would be frozen to death? When Xiaohua immersed his thoughts into the space, he found that everything was the same as usual. That egg-shaped Ice Worm King egg was placed inside, and the spiritual herbs were not affected at all. And, fortunately, I was a bit anxious last night. Fortunately, nothing happened. Xiaohua sighed in relief and threw the Ice Worm King egg into the furthest corner of the space, letting it be far away from the spiritual herbs. Just when Xiaohua was checking the space, from the southern plain, far away from Xiaohua, came a jing sound. Although it was far away, the sound seemed to be able to resonate in people's hearts. Xiaohua's heart shook when he heard it. He quickly pulled his mind out of the space and dodged. Not caring whether it was useful or not, he hid between a mountain rock at the bottom of the canyon. Jie. Another 2 hurried sounds shook Xiaohua's little heart and made it beat wildly. Then, it was silent again. What is this thing? Xiaohua's face was gloomy. He thought to himself, listening to that sound, it should be a kind of bird. This thing actually dares to call out in the Ice Worm King's territory. I'm afraid it came here to cause trouble? A single Ice Worm King can freeze I to death without even getting close. Adding on an inexplicable bird, won't I be dead? When the city gate is on fire, the fish in the moat will also suffer. He better not get involved with others. Thinking about this, Xiaohua lost his enthusiasm to explore. He came here because he knew that there were no ice worms in this canyon. Since there was an unknown danger, he naturally had to retreat. Just as Xiaohua turned around, his gaze suddenly landed on a large tree halfway up the mountain with only bare branches, and there was actually a person looking down on it. Xiaohua was slightly startled. His body stopped for a moment, not daring to move. Seeing that person also not moving, he raised his voice and said, "Fellow Taoist, please." That person still didn't move. Could it be a dead person? Xiaohua stared blankly and thought to himself, in the southern color plains, everyone was frozen to death. This person, Xiaohua didn't dare to approach. He soared up and looked from afar. When he saw clearly, he couldn't help but be shocked. Io, isn't this Yong Shang? Why wasn't he frozen into an ice pillar by the ice worm? Moreover, there's a ball of blood on his back? Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Just now, he was looking at those ice pillars and didn't pay attention to the two sides of the stone wall. Of course, he couldn't see Yong Shang's corpse. When Xiao Hua took Yong Shang's corpse down from the mountain and saw the fatal wound on the corpse, he couldn't help but gasp. He saw that Yong Shang's body didn't have the slightest trace of being frozen by the ice worm. Only his Taoist robe was a bit messy. And in Yong Shang's heart, there was a sharp hole. Inside the hole, the blood had already flowed out. That human heart was also gone. This clearly wasn't done by the ice worm. Could it be there are other powerful spirit beasts in the southern color plains? Xiao Hua suddenly thought of the mind-shaking cry he heard just now. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He didn't dare to delay any longer and picked up Yong Shang's corpse. First, he threw everything in the storage bag into his own space. Then, he took out the silk bag and put it into his storage bag. He hurriedly urged his magic power and quickly flew out of the valley. His anxious appearance like a stray dog was really laughable. Fortunately, Xiao Hua didn't go too far. He didn't use any notes talismans. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he already arrived at the valley's entrance. Xiao Hua slowed down and shouted loudly, "Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Li." Hearing Xiao Hua's shout, Li Xiaowen and the others were all stunned. They looked at each other and all soared up. They didn't expect Xiao Hua to come out so quickly. Some people didn't even think that Xiao Hua would be able to come back safely. When they saw Yong Shang's corpse, they were greatly shocked. They naturally looked at Yong Shang's waist. Of course, the storage bag on his waist was already put into Xiao Hua's sleeve, causing them to be slightly disappointed. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, did you get the silk bag?" Li Xiaowen's gaze swept over the corpse and immediately asked. "Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. It is already in I's storage bag," Xiao Hua said with a smile. As he spoke, Xiao Hua put down Yong Shang's corpse. He patted his storage bag and took out 2 silk bags. He shook them in front of everyone and put them back into his storage bag. "Good." Li Xiaowen and the others finally let out a sigh of relief. Looking at Yong Shang's corpse, Sun Fian frowned and said, "Where did you find fellow Taoist Yong's corpse? Is it far from the valley's entrance?" Xiao Hua had already thought of a countermeasure. He said in a low voice, "It's a bit far. It was on a withered tree on a cliff. If it wasn't for I's sharp eyes, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to find it." "Fellow Taoist Yong's injury, what's going on? I am a bit puzzled." Xiao Hua pointed at Yong Shang's chest and asked. Chapter 1362. This? Li Xiaowen and the others looked at each other with puzzled faces. Li Xiaowen bitterly smiled and said, "Not only is fellow Taoist Xiao puzzled, I am also scratching my head. This kind of injury should have been caused by the heart being dug out. I and the others have shallow knowledge and don't know what kind of monster or enemy did this. Fellow Taoist Li, look at the wound on fellow Taoist Yong's chest. It seems to have been cut open by something sharp." Sun Fian lowered his head and looked at the edge of the wound for a long time. "Yes, fellow Taoist Sun is right. Could it be that fellow Taoist Yong encountered a mortal enemy in the southern color plane?" Li Xiaowen held his chin and said in a low voice, "Otherwise, in addition to the ice worms in the southern color plane, there are also..." When Li Xiaowen said this, he suddenly thought of something and his face changed greatly. He was abnormally frightened. When he turned to look at the others, besides Xiao Hua who was still somewhat confused, the other 4 were also pale. "Let's go!" Li Xiaowen shouted in a low voice. Before he finished speaking, he took out a flight talisman and stuck it on his body. He soared into the sky. The other 4's movements weren't slow either, and they flew up one after another. Xiao Hua was puzzled at first, but after thinking for a bit, he was greatly alarmed and flew up. The 5 didn't even care about Yong Shang's corpse and fled far away. The 5 flew for more than half a day. Seeing that they were already very far away from the Gushu mountain range, they slowed down and let out a slight sigh of relief. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Li Xiaowen opened up some distance from the others and flew at the back with Xiao Hua. Fellow Taoist Xiao, you've kept eye in the dark. Seeing that the people in front couldn't hear his voice, Li Xiaowen turned his face and said to Xiao Hua with a deep voice. Xiao Hua's heart tightened and he promptly cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist Li, I am very puzzled. May I know what fellow Taoist is talking about? AI, fellow Taoist, don't play dumb with I. Li Xiaowen's face was full of disdain. When fellow Taoist escaped from the southern color plane, I was somewhat puzzled. With fellow Taoist's second stage flying speed, how could you escape the encirclement of the ice worms? Even with the strange fireball talisman, it's impossible to kill all the ice worms. Most importantly, I'm a talisman master myself. Of course I know that although there are high-grade talismans in this world, high-grade or top-grade talismans can't possibly increase the speed of a cultivator in the second layer to that of a cultivator in the fifth layer. Fellow Taoist Xiao, the other fellow Taoists might believe you, but he don't. So it's like that. Xiao Hua's mind whirled rapidly, yet his expression didn't change. He cupped his hands and said, Fellow Taoist Li's discerning eyes are indeed like torches. I have indeed practiced a type of body lightning technique that can increase my speed when using a flight talisman. There's such a miraculous technique? Although Li Xiaowen sounded surprised, his face didn't seem to be moved. Presumably, he had already figured it out. It's a pity that I haven't mastered it yet, I can only barely use it. Xiao Hua had an embarrassed look on his face. It's already enough. Your flying speed can actually catch up to us. It's absolutely something that makes people flabbergasted. Li Xiaowen shook his head. That's right, fellow Taoist Li, about fellow Taoist Yong's matter, what do you think? Xiao Hua asked very modestly, I's cultivation is shallow, and my knowledge is also lacking. I still want to ask fellow Taoist Li for guidance. Li Xiaowen heard this and frowned. His face had a slight trace of fear, and he said in a low voice, Actually, I also don't know what's going on. However, according to I's guess, I'm afraid this is the work of another extremely powerful demon beast. Only a demon beast would eat a human heart. Sigh, thinking about it, fellow Taoist Yong escaped with us, and from what fellow Taoist Xiao said, the place where fellow Taoist Yong was killed wasn't too far from the entrance of the valley. I reckon that when that demon beast attacked fellow Taoist Yong, we must have been nearby. At such a close distance, we actually didn't sense anything. Fellow Taoist Xiao, say, if that demon beast targeted us, would we still have our lives? Hearing this, Xiao Hua also felt his blood run cold. He very naturally turned his head to look and casually asked, Such a powerful demon beast, what kind of demon beast could it be? Who knows? Li Xiaowen activated the flying talisman and also casually said, If it wasn't a demon beast, it could also be a ghost cultivator or a devil cultivator. Devil cultivator? This was already the second time Xiao Hua heard this term. He asked very curiously, These cultivators can also be more powerful than fellow Taoist Li? Devil cultivators and ghost cultivators can't be considered as cultivators. Li Xiaowen said with a smile, Devil cultivators practice the cultivation method of the devil world and feed on the flesh and blood of human cultivators, so they are our mortal enemies. On the other hand, ghost cultivators practice an extremely strange cultivation method that feeds on the essence and blood of cultivators. This poor Taoist can't explain it clearly. However, looking at fellow Taoist Yong's fatal wound, it's also one of the methods that devil cultivators and ghost cultivators use to kill cultivators. Oh, so it's like that? Xiao Hua nodded. After flying forward for a while, everyone landed in a place with beautiful scenery to rest. The light wind and gentle clouds were truly different from what they saw in the southern color plains before. The 6 people sat upright on the ground and closed their eyes to adjust their breathing. They first filled Xiao Hua's magic power before they started talking. The first place, the southern color plains, we encountered extremely powerful ice worms and lost fellow Taoist Yong. The second place, the Yulian Mountains, is even more dangerous. Perhaps we will have even more losses. If any of the fellow Taoists have an accident, the silk bags won't be able to be gathered together. How will we continue on our path in the future? Fu Shu grumbled. Could it be that fellow Taoist Fu's meaning is to gather our silk bags together with one person? Sun Fian sneered. I was just saying. If you want I to hand over the silk bag, I also won't be willing. Fu Shu repeatedly waved his hand. I just feel that this treasure hunt seems to be somewhat difficult. It's not quite the same as before. There's nothing different. Li Xiaowen said indifferently, the previous few times were also like this. Even in the end, the wandering cultivators in Heaven's Forsaken were also greatly damaged. And those who were able to stay were all extremely outstanding people. Yeah, there's only so many techniques and treasures. If everyone goes, there won't be enough to share. Fan Daomao laughed. Everyone chatted for a while, venting their nervous emotions. Only then did Li Xiaowen stand up and say, Fellow Taoists, this place is still far from the Yulian Mountains. The journey might take 5 days. There shouldn't be any danger along the way, but we still have to be careful. Immediately, the 5 of them were in high spirits again. They flew into the sky and flew towards another Yulian Mountains. Xiaohua didn't know where the Yulian Mountains was, nor did he know what dangers there were in the Yulian Mountains. However, looking at everyone's nervous expressions and what they were talking about, he knew that it was a dangerous place that wasn't any worse than the southern color plains. After flying for another half a day, night arrived. Everyone found a large cave and waited for Li Xiaowen to set up the warning talismans. Then, everyone sat down cross-legged and closed their eyes to adjust their breathing. Xiaohua was the same as before. He found a secluded place and sat with his palms facing the sky. From the outside, Xiaohua seemed to be cultivating. However, in reality, Xiaohua had already immersed his mind into the space. He had already thrown everything in Yongshang's storage bag into the space. He didn't even have time to look at it carefully. Inside Yongshang's storage bag, in addition to some bottles and jars, there were also some yellow talismans, a lot of spirit stones, and a small booklet. Is this a technique? Xiaohua saw the booklet and felt a burst of ecstasy in his heart. He opened the booklet in the space. Before he could clearly see the contents, a page fell out of the booklet. When Xiaohua saw the thing that fell out, he couldn't help but be surprised. It was also a piece of gold leaf. It looked exactly the same as Zhang Jihao's. Xiaohua put the 2 pieces of gold leaf together in the space and couldn't see any difference between them. Strange. Xiaohua thought, what kind of good thing is this gold leaf? How come Zhang Jihao has it, and Yongshang also has it? But if it's a good thing, how can it be good when many people have it? Maybe Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, and the others also have it. Xiaohua thought and threw the gold leaf to the side. Then he looked at the booklet. The booklet was very thin. Inside, there were some densely packed chants. Xiaohua carefully read it. There were about a few thousand words. Unfortunately, the cover of the booklet didn't mention how to use the chants. Therefore, Xiaohua didn't know what the chants were. However, after Xiaohua recited it several times in his heart, he knew that this cultivation method wasn't a basic cultivation method. It didn't have any effect on the growth of magic power. Every time Xiaohua recited it, he would feel calm and refreshed, and it would be easier for him to enter the state of cultivation. Obviously, this is a supplementary cultivation method. Xiaohua was a little disappointed. However, he still recited the chants in his heart to keep his mind clear and organize the other things. Yongshang had a lot of things. He had more things than Zhang Jihao and the disciples of the spirit husbandry sect. Xiaohua put away the spirit stones and other things. He also put away the yellow talismans and other things. Then he looked at the bottles and jars that he took out. There were many different kinds of pills in the jars and jars. It was very complicated. This is the marrow cleansing pill? Xiaohua slowly organized them. When he saw the 4 bottles, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then, joy climbed up his brows. There's also a foundation establishment pill? The last jade bottle really made Xiaohua go crazy. He really didn't expect that the unremarkable Yongshang would have so many precious pills in his hands. He even had the legendary foundation establishment pill. Yongshang must have prepared these pills for a long time. He wanted to use them when he had a breakthrough in his cultivation. He said he wanted to, but he left with regrets. How sad. Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh inwardly. If he didn't participate in this treasure hunt, with these marrow-cleansing pills and the pills he would use to build his foundation in the future, Yongshang's future would be boundless. But now, fate has made a fool of us. Chapter 1363. As Xiaohua lamented Yongshang's bitter experience, he was about to put away the marrow-cleansing pills and foundation establishment pills. However, at this moment, Xiaohua suddenly froze. His mouth revealed a bitter smile as he inwardly thought, "Just now, I was still talking about Yongshang. Look at me, I already have the marrow-cleansing pill in my hands, yet I still want to use it in the future. While searching for treasures, I need to increase my cultivation. If I don't take it now, when I encounter danger in the Yulian Mountains and need magic power in the next few days, wouldn't the heavens and earth be unable to help me?" Thinking this, Xiaohua looked at the people nearby who were all closing their eyes and adjusting their breathing. He put a marrow-cleansing pill into his mouth. The marrow-cleansing pill melted as soon as it entered his mouth, turning into liquid that flowed into his abdomen. Soon after, it was absorbed by Xiaohua's meridians. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He began to circulate the cultivation method of the second layer of the qi refining realm and began to refine the marrow-cleansing pill's medicinal power. Just as Xiaohua was concentrating on cultivating, the reverse light within the space stopped as usual. An indescribable fluctuation began to surge. At the same time, the starlight in the sky shone down, wrapping Xiaohua in the center. After about 4 hours, Xiaohua finished refining the marrow-cleansing pill. After carefully inspecting it, he found that his cultivation had indeed made some progress. Moreover, the effect was much better than the marrow-cleansing pill he obtained from the auction in Jinghua City. It was comparable to more than 4 months of bitter cultivation. And fortunately, it was useful. It seems that the marrow-cleansing pill from before was refined from spirit herbs that were too young. Yongshang's 3 jade bottles contained 30 marrow-cleansing pills. According to my previous experience, it should be comparable to 10 years of bitter cultivation. I used nearly 12 years of bitter cultivation to advance from the first layer of the qi refining realm to the second layer of the qi refining realm. I don't know how many years it will take to advance from the second layer of the qi refining realm to the third layer of the qi refining realm. Xiaohua inwardly calculated. 30 essence cleansing pills? This isn't a small number. Even Shang Huaming couldn't gather that many pills in the past. I wonder how Yongshang got his hands on them. Xiaohua thought about some useless things before popping another essence cleansing pill into his mouth. The night quickly passed. Perhaps it was because they had been in a hurry the day before, or perhaps it was because they had just experienced a life and death escape, but Li Xiaowen and the others did not immediately get up in the morning. It was only when the sun was high in the sky that they got up and removed the warning talismans. Over the course of the night, Xiaohua had taken 4 marrow-cleansing pills in one go, which was equivalent to 2 years of bitter cultivation. The progress of his cultivation was quite obvious. However, for an ordinary cultivator, 2 years might be enough to raise their cultivation from the second layer to the third layer, but for Xiaohua, it was still somewhat insufficient. Even when Li Xiaowen and the others looked at Xiaohua, the corners of their brows slightly raised. They were too lazy to even show a trace of astonishment. "Fellow Taoists, are you ready?" Li Xiaowen finished tidying up and asked softly, "If there's nothing else, we'll be leaving. We still have to travel for a day, so I'm afraid we won't have much time to rest." Everyone nodded and followed Li Xiaowen as they continued to fly in the direction of Yulian Mountains. Xiaohua was still the last. After last night's bitter cultivation, his cultivation had improved a lot. Magic power flowed through his entire body like mercury flowing down the ground, very smooth. Under the urging of his magic power, the flying talisman also displayed a greater effect. Xiaohua's flying speed was also much faster than before. Right now, I'm only at the second layer of qi refining, but my flying speed is comparable to that of an 11th layer qi refining cultivator. What if I cultivate to the 11th layer? Then how fast could the flying speed be? Wouldn't it be comparable to that of a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator? Hee, then even if this young master can't beat them, I can still escape. Xiaohua secretly laughed as he flew. Xiaohua's thoughts were quite beautiful. If he calculated like this, wouldn't his flying speed be comparable to that of a nascent soul cultivator when he reached foundation establishment? When he reached the legendary Great Ascension stage, wouldn't his flying speed be comparable to that of an immortal? For 4 days in a row, Xiaohua and the others flew during the day and cultivated at night. Other people didn't say anything, but Xiaohua's cultivation increased bit by bit. He hadn't even used half of the 30 marrow cleansing pills he obtained from Yongshang, yet he actually reached the middle stage of the second layer of qi refining. One day, the 5 of them were flying to the left of a mountain forest when they saw a cultivator in the 7th layer of qi refining flying diagonally in front of them. During the past 4 days, Xiaohua and the others had been flying through rather remote areas. If they weren't flying through ravines, they were flying through deep mountains and swamps. It was rare for them to encounter other cultivators. Now that they saw this cultivator, they were slightly startled. They secretly slowed down and respectfully waited for the cultivator to pass. The cultivator glanced at them, then ignored them and continued on his way. After the cultivator left, the 5 of them flew up again. Originally, it was normal for them to encounter other cultivators, but in the next few hours, Xiaohua and the others met one after another. There were qi refining cultivators, foundation establishment cultivators, and so on. Xiaohua wasn't the only one who found this strange. Li Xiaowen and the others were also puzzled. In the end, when several cultivators in the 5th layer of qi refining like them passed by, Li Xiaowen stepped forward and blocked them. He very politely asked about the reason. The result made Xiaohua and the others very happy. About 2 hours to the left of Xiaohua and the others, there was a small e-bazaar tomorrow. Once those cultivators left, Li Xiaowen and the others stopped flying. Fellow Taoists, although we prepared a lot of things, we also used up a lot of them in the southern color plane, especially the fire-type yellow talismans. Even though we've already used them up, if we can go to the e-bazaar to replenish them, it'll be beneficial at that time. I want to go take a look. What do you think, fellow Taoists? Everyone was also happy to hear this. They stopped flying forward and looked for a quiet place to cultivate. On the morning of the 2nd day, they determined the direction and directly flew to the e-bazaar. The e-bazaar was quite famous. It was called Fengju because there was a cultivator family with the surname Feng. When Xiaohua and the others arrived at Fengju, the sun had already risen. Many cultivators who received the news also rushed to the e-bazaar. Therefore, although Xiaohua and the others didn't know the exact location, they still found it by following others. The e-bazaar wasn't located in the small town called Fengju. Instead, it was located in a valley 50 kilometers southeast of the small town. The valley's entrance had a restriction commonly used in the cultivation world. It was used to distinguish the identity of cultivators. It was similar to the restriction used in the western part of Jinghua City. Xiaohua and the others were naturally able to enter without any hindrance. After entering the valley, there were quite a few cultivators strolling around leisurely. There were also quite a few cultivators who placed their items on the ground and sat down cross-legged, waiting for others to come forward to trade. Although the valley looked a bit messy, the noise was much quieter, making it feel very peaceful. Seniors, are you here to participate in Fengju's e-bazaar? A young cultivator with delicate features and a cultivation around the 3rd layer of qi condensation stood at the entrance of the valley. When he saw Xiaohua and the others enter, he very respectfully stepped forward and saluted. Yes, may I ask if there are any special rules? Li Xiaowen asked with a smile. Junior is a disciple of the Feng clan. My name is Discipline Hall. Senior, thank you for coming to participate in the e-bazaar. Discipline Hall smiled and said, My Feng clan's e-bazaar is the same as other bazaars. There are no special rules. Seniors only need to hand over 10 low-grade spirit stones. Oh, 10 low-grade spirit stones? Li Xiaowen nodded. That's not a lot. As he spoke, he took out a mid-grade spirit stone from his storage pouch and handed it over. This is for the 5 of us. I'll leave the rest for you. Thank you, Senior. The disciple seemed to be very happy. He thanked him and said, Do you need Junior to accompany seniors around? No need, I'll take a look for myself. Fellow Taoist, go ahead. Yes. Discipline Hall said. He cupped his hands and left to greet the other cultivators. Fellow Taoists, we don't have too much time. This valley's e-bazaar isn't very large. 4 hours should be enough for us to replenish our yellow talismans. Li Xiaowen roughly looked around the valley and said to everyone, We'll go our own ways. When the time comes, we'll come back here and meet up. Everyone nodded and went in different directions. Xiaohua thought for a moment, turned around, and walked in front of Discipline Hall. He cupped his hands and asked, Fellow Taoist Feng, I have a matter to ask? Oh, please speak, fellow Taoist. Discipline Hall looked at Xiaohua's cultivation and didn't have any intention of neglecting him. Excuse me, fellow Taoist, in the valley's e-bazaar, are there any medicinal pills that can increase one's cultivation? Xiaohua asked in a low voice. This Discipline Hall had an awkward expression. He smiled apologetically and said, Fellow Taoist is giving I a difficult problem. Inside the valley's e-bazaar, there are fellow Taoists from all over the world. They can place their things anywhere they want. I don't know where those medicinal pills are. Xiaohua smiled and took out a mid-grade spirit stone from his storage pouch. He handed it over and said, Fellow Taoist Feng is on duty here, so you must have some information. If you can tell me, I'll be very grateful. Seeing the mid-grade spirit stone, Discipline Hall's eyes brightened. He took it, looked around, and said, Medicinal pills that can increase cultivation are rare in the state of Xi. Let alone my Feng clan's e-bazaar. I'm afraid they're not common even in Jinghua City's e-bazaar. Xiaohua had a smile on his face and didn't say anything. He knew that since Discipline Hall dared to take the spirit stone, there must be some unknown information. Sure enough, Discipline Hall took out a summoning talisman from his storage pouch and handed it over, saying, Fellow Taoist, please take this summoning talisman and send it out in 2 hours. I still have an errand here. Once I'm done, I'll help you contact them. However, fellow Taoist, do you have enough spirit stones or items to exchange? Xiaohua had just received Yongshang's storage pouch and was rich and overbearing. He rubbed his nose and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Feng, don't worry. I definitely won't disappoint you. If I'm satisfied, I'll be extra grateful to fellow Taoist Feng. Well said, well said. Discipline Hall smiled and cupped his hands. Sure enough, Wind Station's e-bazaar couldn't compare to Jinghua City's e-bazaar. Not to mention that there weren't many items, even the quality of the items was much lower. Moreover, e-bazaar's items were generally low and mid-grade spirit stones. High-grade spirit stones were extremely rare. Seeing this situation, Xiaohua realized that it wasn't because the spirit stones in e-bazaar had depreciated, nor was it because Jinghua City's items were too expensive. Instead, it was because Jinghua City's e-bazaar was one of the most famous e-bazaars in the state of Xi. At that level of e-bazaar or e-bazaar, mid-grade spirit stones were only the lowest grade spirit stones. Chapter 1364. The Feng clan's e-bazaar really didn't have anything outstanding. It wasn't on the same level as Jinghua City. However, Xiaohua didn't need any finished products. After buying a lot of low-grade talisman paper and talisman ink, he didn't have anything else to buy. Soon after, he held his hands and slowly strolled around while waiting for 2 hours to pass. What is this? Xiaohua strolled around for a long time. He stood here and squatted there, appearing extremely leisurely. However, when he arrived in front of a small stall, his eyes were immediately attracted by a pitch-black stick that was about a foot long. The stick was thrown to the side of the stall. There were some messy things on the stall that looked very ordinary. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to go forward. He only quietly stood at a place with a bit more people. He seemed to be negotiating with others, but his eyes would occasionally glance at the stall. The owner of the stall was a sturdy middle-aged man. He had a square face and rough skin. He didn't look like a cultivator at all. It seemed that the items in the man's stall were not attractive at all. Almost everyone looked around casually and did not stop at all. Even if there were a few people who stopped and looked at the items in the stall, they would leave before they could stand still. As for the middle-aged man, his face was filled with obvious anxiety. From time to time, he would reach out his hand, wanting to greet people, but in the end, not a single word came out of his mouth. After looking for a moment, Xiaohua had an idea in his mind. He slowly walked to the stall of the middle-aged cultivator. Seeing Xiaohua stop in front of his stall, the cultivator's face revealed a happy expression. He rubbed his hands together, looking very excited. However, the cultivator still didn't say anything. He only looked at Xiaohua with a fervent gaze and pointed at his stall with his hand. Xiaohua frowned and thought to himself, could it be he's a mute? He looked for a moment and picked up a palm-sized brown object that he had just seen. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, what is this?" The middle-aged cultivator opened his mouth and his face turned red. He finally said, This is a lump of black gold for refining grade materials. Oh, so it's a stutterer. Xiaohua suddenly realized. No wonder he had to greet him. After the cultivator finished speaking, he let out a long breath and the redness on his face faded a bit. He looked at Xiaohua's calm expression and continued, This thing. If fellow Taoist wants it, please take out three mid-grade spirit stones. The cultivator spoke with great effort and Xiaohua also listened with great effort. After he finished speaking, Xiaohua pointed at the things next to him and said, Are these all used for refining? Are they all common prices? When the middle-aged cultivator heard this, he nodded his head vigorously. There weren't many cultivators who came to Feng Clan's bazaar and those who knew how to refine were even fewer. His materials weren't particularly good so no one came to him to trade. Now, listening to Xiaohua's tone, it seemed he also didn't know too much. Although he didn't know if Xiaohua really wanted to buy it or not, he was still happy that someone came to take a look. Xiaohua put down the black gold in his hand and picked up another piece. He looked at it while thinking. Looking at this cultivator's rough appearance, he must be a disciple of some small sect that knew how to refine qi. Although he didn't understand these materials for refining, it didn't mean he wouldn't have a use for them in the future. Anyway, he had a lot of spirit stones in his space so there was no harm in buying some. Thinking, Xiaohua casually asked, What about this piece? What is it? This also doesn't know. Presumably because Xiaohua asked something he didn't know, the man's stuttering became even more serious. He only raised his finger and said, 1 mid-grade spirit stone. After he finished speaking, he actually wiped the sweat off his forehead with his hand. Xiaohua almost wanted to cover his mouth and laugh, but he still managed to hold himself back. He nodded and said, Since that's the case, I'll buy some. Good. The middle-aged cultivator was overjoyed. He rubbed his hands and said, I wonder, which one does fellow Taoist want? Xiaohua calculated in his mind, and with a swipe of his hand he actually managed to swipe the majority of the things on the middle-aged cultivator's stall. This much? The middle-aged cultivator stuttered. Yes. Xiaohua nodded, then casually pointed at the pitch-black stick and casually asked, Is this also used for refining? The middle-aged cultivator squatted down and gathered the materials that Xiaohua had just pulled out. His mouth was wide open as he calculated how many spirit stones these materials were worth. When he heard Xiaohua's words, he looked at the rod that Xiaohua was pointing and When Xiaohua heard this, his eyes became even brighter. He said with a slightly trembling voice, Can you sell it to I? Sell? Oh, that's selling. The middle-aged cultivator didn't even raise his head and said without hesitation. Xiaohua's heart turned cold. He was about to raise the price when the cultivator said, Fellow Taoist, you curious as long as I'll gift it to you. The last sentence seemed to have been said with courage, and it was said very quickly. Ha! Xiaohua's heart bloomed with joy. He reached out and picked up the black stick. Although the stick was extremely heavy, it didn't seem to be too strenuous in Xiaohua's hands. Fellow Taoist has good strength. The middle-aged cultivator was somewhat flabbergasted. Then I will take it, Xiaohua said without any trace of politeness. Please. The middle-aged cultivator was also quite straightforward. He waved his hand and said, that thing? I don't know what it is. It's in a fountain stream. I picked it up. Fellow Taoist, these materials total 70 middle grade spirit stones. But Xiaohua looked left and right. Seeing that no one was paying attention, he waved his hand and put the black stick into his space. Then he put all the materials on the ground into his storage pouch and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist, where is your storage pouch? I will give you the spirit stones. The middle-aged cultivator hurriedly untied his storage pouch. When Xiaohua put the 78 middle-grade spirit stones into his storage pouch, the stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. He almost couldn't believe that this little cultivator, who was only at the second level of qi refining, could take out so many spirit stones and buy so many refining materials. Fellow Taoist, the middle-aged cultivator looked left and right and said in a low voice, buy so many materials? Do it a few months. Xiaohua praised in his heart and said with a smile, I will tell you. Many thanks for pointing it out, fellow Taoist. However, I am not alone. There is still a master from my sect here. The middle-aged cultivator suddenly understood. He immediately nodded and said with a smile, I have thought too much. Soon after, Xiaohua didn't stay any longer. He cupped his hands and left. As he walked, he put the tip of the devil spear together with the pitch-black stick. Sure enough, the crack at the bottom of the tip of the devil spear matched the crack of the stick perfectly. I knew it. Just now, this crack looked very familiar. Sure enough, it was like this. Xiaohua was very happy in his heart. It was because of this guess that he went to the stall to buy those refining materials. And after he knew the weight of this stick, he was even more certain that this was definitely a devil tool. It's just that, from the looks of it, this devil tool is still incomplete. The back of the stick is still cut off. Xiaohua looked at the crack at the back of the stick and said thoughtfully, I don't know whose work this is. To actually be able to cut this hard devil tool into several pieces. Even if I managed to use this magic tool, how would I be able to completely restore it? Soon after, Xiaohua looked at the pile of refining materials that he just bought and thought to himself, could it be that I still need to practice refining? This devil tool is an item of the devil world. The refining methods of the cultivation world might not necessarily work. Besides, why would I restore this devil tool? It's fine as long as there's a spear tip that can be used. Xiaohua immediately came to a realization and thought to himself with a bitter smile. After looking for a while, Xiaohua estimated that it was about time and walked towards the entrance of the valley. Sure enough, at this time, there weren't many people entering the valley. There was only a young disciple standing there, bored to death, looking all around. Xiaohua saw that the disciplinary wind mansion wasn't there, so he didn't walk forward. He walked to a slightly secluded place and took out the communication talisman. Using his magic power, the communication talisman turned into a ray of light and unexpectedly flew into the stone wall to the side. Not long after, he saw the disciplinary wind mansion suddenly appear from the corner of the stone wall in the distance. After looking left and right, he walked straight toward Xiaohua. Fellow Taoist Feng, how is it? Xiaohua waited for the disciplinary wind mansion to come closer and cupped his hands with a smile. I'm afraid it's a bit troublesome. The disciplinary wind mansion said with a slight frown. Xiaohua stared blankly and his heart turned cold. He said in a low voice, I hope fellow Taoist Feng can explain. The disciplinary wind mansion looked left and right and said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist, please follow I. Xiaohua followed the disciplinary wind mansion to the side of the stone wall and said in a low voice, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I know a few loose cultivators. Always have some rare goods. As for the origin of these goods, I naturally won't ask too much. It's not convenient for them to come to my Feng clan's e-bazaar. Every time, they entrust e-bazaar to my martial uncle to bring them to sell on consignment. This is because my martial uncle had something to do a few days ago and left this matter to I to handle. As for the medicinal pills fellow Taoist mentioned, they always take out a little bit each time. Therefore, I saw fellow Taoist's eagerness to get medicine and agreed. Could it be there aren't any medicinal pills this time? Xiaohua asked curiously. It's just outside of fellow Taoist's expectations. The disciplinary Wind Mansion shook his head and said, it's not that there aren't any this time, it's just that there are too many. Too many? Xiaohua felt a burst of joy. However, he still didn't understand. Since there are some, why does fellow Taoist say it's troublesome? The disciplinary Wind Mansion smiled wryly. It's because their requirements are rather harsh. That's strange. What's so harsh about it? Fellow Taoist, please dispel my confusion. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said. Chapter 1365. Everyone is familiar with Little Dot as the group leader. Harass him more in order to make up for the mistake of being the third flower. This is the second update. I'll be honest with fellow Taoist. Feng Fu sighed and said, there are 3 types of medicinal pills this time. One is the marrow cleansing pill, one is the Peiyuan pill, and the last is the clear breeze pill. I don't know the specific number. I only know that the most effective Peiyuan pill has the least amount, while the marrow cleansing pill and the clear breeze pill have the most amount. Because the amount of medicinal pills is a bit too many, they made 2 requests. Which 2? Xiaohua knew that his anxiety was definitely unfavorable to him. However, he still couldn't help but say it. The first is, if they're going to buy them, then they'll buy them all together. They don't want more people to know about this. Feng Fu looked at Xiaohua and said in a low voice, but, with so many medicinal pills, who can eat them all? Sure enough, Xiaohua also frowned slightly. It wasn't that he didn't have spirit stones, but the problem was that if he bought them all, wouldn't that be inviting trouble onto himself? What's the second? Xiaohua asked again. The second is even more outrageous. They requested to not trade in my Feng clan's e-bazaar. Impossible! Xiaohua heard and immediately shook his head like a rattledrum. That's right. Feng Fu also said in a low voice, they should be trading in my Feng clan's e-bazaar. If they go out, who can guarantee fellow Taoist's safety? They're breaking the rules. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said in a low voice, fellow Taoist Feng, I have a question. Why don't they keep these medicinal pills for themselves? From fellow Taoist's words, they have so many medicinal pills and can take some out every time. If they take them for themselves, wouldn't they be able to reach the 10th layer of qi refining? Fellow Taoist, this question is rather strange. Feng Fu looked at Xiaohua somewhat strangely. Fellow Taoist, could it be that you can't increase your cultivation because your realm isn't high enough? It's true that medicinal pills can increase one's magic power, but if one's cultivation isn't high enough, no matter how many medicinal pills one takes, it still won't increase one's cultivation. I have seen a lot of cultivators like you who want to break through the bottleneck with the help of medicine. You don't have to doubt I. No, fellow Taoist misunderstands. What I mean is that those loose cultivators can use medicinal power to forcefully break through like I did. Xiaohua hurriedly explained. Fellow Taoist, you're wrong again. How do you know that they haven't tried this before? The disciplinary officer smiled and said, it's precisely because they tried it with fellow Taoist before that they didn't place their hopes on medicinal pills. And I understand. It's because they have no hope in the medicinal pill aspect that they're unscrupulously searching for other avenues. Xiaohua silently nodded and also sighed. I don't know if I sigh, let's not talk about it. I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Feng to tell them that I agree to the first condition and let them state a price. If possible, I will take out the corresponding items or spirit stones. However, the second condition is absolutely out of the question. The disciplinary officer glanced at Xiaohua thoughtfully and said with a smile, all right, I'll go tell them now. I hope they'll bring good news to fellow Taoist. I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist phone. Xiao Hua cupped his hands in thanks. After the disciplinary officer left with quick steps, Xiao Hua slightly narrowed his eyes and stared at his back. It was unknown what he was thinking. The disciplinary officer was quite fast. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, he returned. Behind him was a cultivator wearing camouflage robes. Seeing that the other party was wearing camouflage robes, Xiao Hua's heart stirred and he inwardly said, "Could it be, fellow Taoist, I've made you wait for a long time?" The disciplinary officer welcomed him with a face full of smiles and said with a smile, "Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you." When this senior heard how straightforward fellow Taoist was, he was also moved, so he also took a step back. Xiao Hua nodded and cupped his hands towards the cultivator behind him, saying, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." That cultivator's voice was hoarse and had already been disguised by the camouflage robes. Urgently, that cultivator looked left and right. He took out a silence talisman and used it to block out the surrounding sounds. Then he said in a low voice, "I heard from fellow Taoist Feng that fellow Taoist has the ability to buy all of I's medicinal pills, but I don't believe it. How many spirit stones does fellow Taoist have? Hehe, where are fellow Taoist's medicinal pills? And how many spirit stones are they worth?" Xiao Hua remained unmoved and asked back, "I have 10 Peiyuan pill, 30 marrow cleansing pills, and 50 clear pleasure pills in this storage pouch." That cultivator patted the storage pouch at his waist and said, "I won't say too much about the market prices of the Peiyuan pill, marrow cleansing pill, and clear pleasure pill. Peiyuan pill costs 15 mid-grade spirit stones, marrow cleansing pill costs 5 mid-grade spirit stones, and clear pleasure pill costs 3 mid-grade spirit stones. Fellow Taoist has to pay a total of 450 mid-grade spirit stones. Fellow Taoist, this price is indeed expensive." Xiao Hua said with a smile, 3 vitality-absorbing fruits and 3 black tusks can refine 10 Peiyuan pill. 3 vitality-absorbing fruits and 3 black tusks are only 6 mid-grade spirit stones, that's all. Fellow Taoist, this Peiyuan pill costs a total of 15 mid-grade spirit stones? Hehe, fellow Taoist, how can spiritual plants be compared to medicinal pills? Especially the Peiyuan pill that can increase one's power? That cultivator sneered, "What I said is the real price. If it wasn't for I having some misgivings, I would have directly put it up for sale in this e.g. Fellow Taoist, don't forget that things like the Peiyuan pill have always been auctioned." "And that's fine." Xiao Hua nodded. He knew. Previously, he bid for a marrow cleansing pill at Jinghua City's e.g. market and spent 10 mid-grade spirit stones. At this time, this rogue cultivator offered a price of 5 mid-grade spirit stones, which really wasn't expensive. Thus, he said with a smile, "I already bought it, why don't you offer a few more spirit stones? Fellow Taoist, you should know that these are all exchanged with my life. If fellow Taoist is 1 less spirit stone, I definitely won't sell it." That cultivator said very decisively. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, stretched out his hand, and said, "I want to see if this medicinal pill is real or fake." To tell the truth, Xiao Hua had never seen so many medicinal pills appear in this e.g. market for so long, so he felt a bit uneasy. "Fellow Taoist, you still haven't taken out your spirit stones, right?" The cultivator didn't hand over his storage pouch. "Then here they are." Xiao Hua took off his storage pouch, but he didn't hand it over to the cultivator. Instead, he handed it over to the discipline hall and said, "Fellow Taoist Feng, take a look. Is the amount of spirit stones inside correct?" The discipline hall glanced at the cultivator and took Xiao Hua's storage pouch. He roughly looked at it and said with a smile, "Senior, you should know that this fellow Taoist's storage pouch indeed has enough spirit stones." Good. The cultivator heard this and very quickly handed over the storage pouch. Xiao Hua patiently inspected it and found that it was indeed a genuine medicinal pill. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. After changing the contents of the storage pouch, he handed the spirit stones back to the cultivator and said with a smile, "Deal. Fellow Taoist, please check the spirit stones." After the cultivator checked, he nodded and said with a smile, I didn't think that I would meet someone as generous as fellow Taoist at the Feng clan's EG market. Nice to meet you. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands and was about to leave. At this time, Xiaohua's heart suddenly stirred and he hastily yelled, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." What? Does fellow Taoist still have something to say? The cultivator turned his head and looked at Xiaohua and the discipline hall in confusion. Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment and looked at the discipline hall. He also said, "This? Fellow Taoist, I have a matter. I don't know if I can ask you directly." What does fellow Taoist want to ask? The cultivator vigilantly asked. It's nothing. Fellow Taoist is overthinking. Xiaohua knew what he was thinking and promptly explained, I want to ask fellow Taoist, do you have any pill recipes or pill refinement methods? Seeing this cultivator take out so many medicinal pills all of a sudden, Xiaohua immediately thought of pill recipes when he thought about what the discipline hall said earlier. The cultivator's expression couldn't be seen due to the mist, but his tone was very hesitant. Xiaohua struck while the iron was hot and said, "These things don't have any use for fellow Taoist, and they might even attract some trouble. Why don't you transfer them to me? He will give fellow Taoist a satisfactory price." When the discipline hall beside them heard this, he was also slightly stunned. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. The cultivator pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you really have a big tone. Pill recipes above EG are hard to find. One pill recipe costs more than 500 high-grade spirit stones, yet fellow Taoist actually Then, the cultivator turned his head and said to the discipline hall, "I want to speak with this fellow Taoist alone. I ask fellow Taoist Feng to leave for a moment." Alright. The discipline hall smiled wryly and turned to leave. After the discipline hall left, the cultivator took out several books from his sleeve and held them in his hand. He said, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I indeed obtained 5 pill recipes. However, I'm not proficient in alchemy, and I don't understand the things inside. If fellow Taoist sincerely wants them, each of these 5 pill recipes will cost 800 high-grade spirit stones, for a total of 4 supreme-grade spirit stones. I want to take a look first." Xiaohua's heart was beating wildly, and he felt somewhat thirsty. The cultivator shook his head and said, "Once you see these pill recipes, perhaps fellow Taoist will know where they came from. If fellow Taoist doesn't want them, what will happen to I? I can't take this risk. If fellow Taoist believes in I, then hurry up and give me the spirit stones." Xiaohua looked at his face, which couldn't be seen clearly under the mist. He clenched his teeth and said, "All right, I believe you." As he said this, he handed over the storage pouch in his sleeve. "Fellow Taoist, is there a mistake? This storage pouch is empty." The cultivator looked at the empty storage pouch and felt very strange. Xiaohua's expression gradually calmed down, and he said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, take a look at this storage pouch. It was specially made by the 7 Skills sect, and it costs 10 supreme-grade spirit stones. I didn't bring that many supreme-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist thinks it's suitable, I can exchange this storage pouch for the pill recipes. Fellow Taoist's storage pouch is really quite a lot." The cultivator glanced at the storage pouch on Xiaohua's waist, then carefully inspected the storage pouch in his hand. Seeing the cultivator inspecting it, Xiaohua couldn't help but feel his heart beating faster. This was the storage pouch he got from the spirit husbandry sect disciple. The space inside was much larger than Yongshang's and was about the same as the one he extorted from the market. Since that one could be exchanged for a few supreme-grade spirit stones, then this one could also be exchanged. Sure enough, the cultivator looked at it and nodded. Fellow Taoist's storage pouch is much better than I's. It should be worth a few supreme-grade spirit stones. Then fellow Taoist, are you willing to exchange? Xiaohua's heart couldn't help but beat faster. Chapter 1366. Everyone is familiar with Xiao Dian as the group leader. Please harass him. In order to make up for the mistake of being the 3rd flower, this is the 3rd update. That cultivator still used his hoarse voice to say, "Why not?" I happen to be lacking such a big storage pouch. However, the 7 Possibilities sect is as shady as the Feng clan. One storage pouch costs 10 top-grade spirit stones. I really don't want to part with it. Since fellow Taoist gave me your storage pouch today, it means that we are fated to meet. Why not trade? The cultivator put away the storage pouch in his sleeve and handed over the 5 small booklets. Xiaohua took them and resisted the urge to open them and put them into his storage pouch. All right, fellow Taoist, I's harvest today is quite bountiful, far surpassing my expectations. Farewell. That cultivator cupped his hands and smiled. Moreover, I didn't expect that fellow Taoist, with your mid-stage second-layer qi refining cultivation, would actually tisk. That cultivator didn't finish his sentence and left. What's the meaning of this? Xiaohua was slightly surprised. This time, he had thrown caution to the wind and wanted to take the risk to get the pill recipes. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of the risks involved. The 7 Possibilities sect is as shady as the Feng clan? Just now, Xiaohua was immersed in the joy of obtaining the pill recipes. Now that he thought about it, he immediately woke up. Of course, the Discipline Hall was a disciple of the Feng clan. It wasn't a big deal for him to buy the Peiyuan pill, but the pill recipes, those were things that even cultivation sects coveted. How could a small cultivation clan not covet them? As for why that cultivator didn't sell the pill recipes to the Feng clan, it might be because he had just obtained them recently and hadn't met any martial uncle from the Discipline Hall. Or maybe the Feng clan knew that the origin of this cultivator's pill recipes was unknown and wasn't willing to pay a high price. If the Feng clan didn't know that the pill recipes were given to him, then it would be fine. But since they knew, how could they let it go? The Discipline Hall was also a disciple of the Feng clan. They wouldn't turn their elbows to him. When he thought up to here, Xiaohua couldn't help but feel regret for his rash actions. But, if he hadn't taken the risk, would he have been able to obtain these pill formulas? Xiaohua understood and immediately walked towards the entrance of the valley. At this time, there was still more than an hour before the appointed time with Li Xiaowen. However, when Xiaohua came to the entrance of the valley, he was overjoyed. The 4 people were standing there and chatting. Thinking about it, these people were all strolling around Jinghua City's EG. How could they care about the Feng clan's EG? After restocking up on materials and yellow talismans, they lost their desire to wander around and returned to the entrance of the valley. Seeing that Xiaohua had unexpectedly returned ahead of time, Li Xiaowen smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you're the last one to return. Did you gain anything?" It's all right. I bought some fireball talismans, but they aren't as good as the ones I bought before. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Since all the fellow Taoists are here, let's leave in advance. It's not appropriate to stay here for too long." As Xiaohua spoke, his eyes slightly glanced at the Feng clan disciple standing not far away. That Feng clan disciple clearly didn't pay attention to them. At this time, many cultivators had already left the valley. Xiaohua's group wasn't the first group. Everyone nodded and stepped out of the valley. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea after Xiaohua's group left, 2 cultivators around the 6th layer of qi refining hurriedly walked out from a corner of the valley. Behind them was the pale-faced Discipline Hall disciple. When the 2 arrived at the entrance of the valley, they immediately questioned the disciple on duty. That disciple was very surprised. After listening, he easily recalled the tall Xiaohua. When they heard that Xiaohua's group had just left, the 2 of them fiercely glared at the Discipline Hall disciple and chased after them from inside the valley. The Discipline Hall disciple's face was filled with panic. He didn't forget to fiercely glare at the disciple on duty and hurriedly chased after them. On the contrary, the disciple who was innocently glared at had a puzzled expression. He strangely looked at the Discipline Hall disciple's back and helplessly shrugged. When Xiaohua's group left the valley, there were also Feng clan disciples on duty outside. However, they didn't stop them from leaving. If Xiaohua was alone, he would definitely want to cover it up and definitely wouldn't directly fly towards the Yulian Mountains. However, Li Xiaowen's group didn't know this and directly flew towards the direction. Xiaohua couldn't explain it clearly and could only follow behind them. Li Xiaowen's group didn't fly very fast and even seemed to be somewhat leisurely. Xiaohua was impatient as he watched from behind. He unconsciously increased his speed and caught up to Li Xiaowen. He said, "Fellow Taoist Li, we don't have much time left. Can you fly a bit faster?" Fly a bit faster? Li Xiaowen stared blankly for a moment before coming to a realization. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I know your cultivation has advanced by leaps and bounds. You're already in the middle of the second layer of qi refining. In addition, your flying speed should be quite a bit faster. However, the Yulian Mountains ahead is a place even more dangerous than the southern colored plains. If we don't conserve our energy, how can we safely pass through it?" These words immediately pushed Xiaohua back. It was as if Xiaohua was urging everyone to fly because he wanted to show off. "Fellow Taoist Li, it's like this?" Xiaohua thought for a moment and still felt that he should roughly explain the situation. However, at this moment, a sneer came from behind him. "Fellow Taoist in front, could you please wait? This is bad." When Xiaohua heard this, his heart skipped a beat. He turned around and sure enough, there were two cultivators wearing clothes similar to the ones from the discipline hall. "Fellow Taoists, what's the matter?" When Li Xiaowen's group saw the Feng clan disciples, their hearts trembled and they became vigilant. Li Xiaowen stopped and cupped his hands. "What's the matter?" A slightly taller and plump Feng clan disciple glanced at Xiaohua and turned his head to ask, "Did you just come from the Feng clan's trade fair?" "That's right. What business does fellow Taoist have with us?" Li Xiaowen asked again. "This fellow Taoist? What's his relationship with you fellow Taoists?" The other thin disciple pointed at Xiaohua and asked straightforwardly. Li Xiaowen slightly frowned and cupped his hands. "This is fellow Taoist Xiao, who has been forsaken by the heavens. What business does fellow Taoist have with us?" "Forsaken by the heavens?" The disciple from before also frowned, inwardly regretting. "If I knew it was forsaken by the heavens, I wouldn't have come with just 2 people. If a few more people came, we could have caught all of these loose cultivators in one fell swoop. But now, it's a bit difficult." Soon after, this disciple slightly leaned to the side, wanting to see if the discipline hall disciples chasing after them had caught up. If it was just the 3 of them, they should still have some assurance. Li Xiaowen and the others were loose cultivators, so how could they not know the dangers involved? Seeing the 6th-level qi condensation disciple of the Feng clan catch up without even explaining the reason, Li Xiaowen sneered and said, "My heaven-forsaken members shouldn't cause trouble, but we're also not afraid of trouble. Fellow Taoist, what business do you have with us? If there's nothing urgent, I and the others still have to hurry on. Farewell." As he spoke, he flung his sleeve and was about to leave. Wait. The slightly fat disciple of the Feng clan became anxious. He pointed at Xiaohua and said, "You can leave, but he can't." "Fellow Taoist, why can't I leave?" Xiaohua sneered. Because you stole something from my Feng clan." The slightly fat disciple's eyes turned and he hurriedly said, "Ha." Xiaohua laughed loudly and said, "I only stayed in the valley of Yi for 2 hours. How could I steal something from your Feng clan? Fellow Taoist, you're really slandering me. Hee, whether you stole or not, you know clearly in your heart. We're too lazy to argue with you. You only need to follow us back to Feng Station. Naturally, my Feng clan's ancestor will deal with you." The slightly thin disciple went with the flow and said, "Even if you're a disciple of one of the 3 great cultivation sects in our country of Shi, you should still come to my Feng clan to explain. Not to mention that you're a member of Heaven Forsaken. If my Feng clan made a mistake, we should give Heaven Forsaken an explanation." At this time, Li Xiaowen also seemed to have thought of Xiaohua's abnormal behavior just now. He whispered, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, what's going on? Did you take something from the Feng clan or not?" Xiaohua glanced at Li Xiaowen and said with a smile, "I only stayed in Yi for 2 hours with fellow Taoist. Does fellow Taoist think that I have the ability to steal something from the Feng clan?" "Fellow Taoists, I'm afraid you've misunderstood." Li Xiaowen cupped his hands and said, "This fellow Taoist has a shallow cultivation. How could he take something from the Feng clan? Could it be that only people with high cultivation can steal things?" It's precisely this kind of shallow rogue cultivator that likes to take other people's things the most. Fellow Taoist, what did fellow Taoist Xiao take from the Feng clan? Li Xiaowen asked curiously. It's not convenient for I to tell fellow Taoist. I ask fellow Taoist Xiao to return with I. If fellow Taoists are not at ease, you can also follow along. What if I don't return with you? Xiao Hua sneered. Don't return? That's not up to you. The slightly shorter disciple sneered. Then he glanced back again. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen's heart trembled. He already felt that the situation was critical. He hurriedly said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, if you took other people's things, it's better to return them as soon as possible. Just now, I already said that I, heaven forsaken, am not afraid of causing trouble, but I also never take the initiative to cause trouble. If fellow Taoist makes any mistakes, I, heaven forsaken, will not protect you. Fellow Taoist Li, do you believe I? Or do you believe the Feng clan? Xiao Hua asked coldly. Naturally believe the truth. Li Xiaowen said anxiously, if fellow Taoist Xiao took it, then quickly take it out and give it to them. Apologize and compensate them a bit. They might not let fellow Taoist Xiao go. Moreover, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you think our matters are more important, or that you took other people's things? Just as he said this, the people from the discipline hall caught up from afar. Their shadows could already be seen. The slightly fatter disciple had been paying attention all along. Now that he saw them, he sneered and said, since that's the case, then come to my Feng clan as guests. After saying this, the two of them glanced at each other. Then, they quickly surrounded the 5 people from the left and right. Not good, let's go. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen and the others were greatly alarmed. They urged the magic power they had long since stored up, and their figures swiftly flew in different directions like lightning. Only Xiao Hua was not in a hurry. He looked for a direction where no one was going and flew over at a leisurely pace. However, even so, the enormous heat wave still caused the two of them to tumble a few times, and they directly fell down from midair. Hee, this guy is really a rogue cultivator. He only knows how to throw fireballs above our heads and in all directions. He doesn't know how to set up defenses below us. If he could also throw a few fireball talismans here, wouldn't we have to bear the consequences? The slightly shorter disciple stabilized his body and smiled as he spoke to the slightly taller disciple. The slightly taller disciple raised his eyebrows. Without waiting for him to speak, his expression immediately changed, and he urgently said, Junior brother, be careful. Be careful? That cultivator immediately looked left and right, but did not discover the slightest abnormality. When he saw that his senior brother's gaze was looking downwards, he was startled in his heart, and promptly lowered his head. Sure enough, just a foot below him, Xiao Hua was holding a spear in his hand, and was rapidly thrusting towards the sole of his foot. Impudent! That cultivator loudly roared, and an icicle talisman was casually created, thrusting towards the top of Xiao Hua's head. This icicle talisman was much larger than the one Xiao Hua used before. Moreover, as the icicle talisman flew through the air, it faintly emitted a zhich sound, which was a sign of vigorous magic power activation. As expected of a 6th-level Qi refining cultivator. The strength of this magic power, the control of this magic power, and the use of yellow talismans are all far beyond what I can compare to. I'm afraid that my iron cloak talisman will be destroyed by this low-level icicle talisman. Xiao Hua saw that the icicle talisman was casually thrusted towards him like a real icicle talisman, and he secretly praised in his heart. Sure enough, the icicle talisman used by a 6th-level Qi refining cultivator was several times more powerful than Xiao Hua's own icicle talisman. Xiao Hua's iron cloak talisman was only able to resist for a moment, and after a flash of brilliance, it was destroyed by the icicle talisman. Xiao Hua tilted his head, and with a pood sound, the icicle talisman pierced Xiao Hua's shoulder. However, even though Xiao Hua was pierced by the icicle talisman, he didn't stop in the slightest. At the same time, the devil spear in his hand pierced that cultivator's leg. Although that cultivator also had a Vajra talisman on his body, which was newly formed after being destroyed by the fireball talisman, when the devil spear pierced through, the Vajra talisman's brilliance actually faintly flashed, and the devil spear pierced a bowl-sized hole in it. Afterwards, the devil spear didn't stop in the slightest, and at almost the same instant that the icicle talisman pierced Xiao Hua's shoulder, the devil spear also pierced that cultivator's leg. Ouch! The sharp pain transmitted from his leg made that cultivator faintly cry out, but his cry didn't spread for long before that cultivator's body immediately fell from midair, like a piece of stone. All of this happened in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. The other cultivator only had time to shout "Junior Marshal Brother" before everything was over. Xiao Hua immediately turned around, and only a few strands of blood flowed out from his shoulder. Xiao Hua was too lazy to pay attention to it, and with a wave of his devil spear, he once again rushed towards that cultivator. Seeing Xiao Hua rush over, that cultivator's heart trembled for no reason, and a trace of fear actually appeared on his face. It was as if Xiao Hua was a 6th-layer qi refining cultivator, and he himself was only a 2nd-layer qi refining cultivator. "Hand over your life," Xiao Hua shouted as he rushed closer. That cultivator anxiously waved his hand, and similarly, a pile of fireball talismans was thrown out, wanting to block in front of Xiao Hua. "Haha, you actually dare to play with fire in front of this young master?" Xiao Hua sneered, and with a wave of his hand, he also threw out a pile of fireball talismans. At the same time that the fireball talismans were thrown out, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up, as if he had thought of something. The corners of his mouth faintly rose, and with another stretch of his hand, he also took out a dozen or so confinement talismans. With a wave of his hand, he activated them with magic power, and scattered them into the rumbling fireballs. The fireballs exploded one by one. Not only did the flowing fire scatter, but even the confinement talismans that had been activated were thrown into disarray by the chi waves, and rapidly flew in all directions without any pattern. If it was a normal confinement talisman, this 6th-layer qi refining cultivator would have many ways to avoid it. However, under the influence of the qi waves from many different directions, the confinement talismans that Xiao Hua had just scattered suddenly appeared near the cultivator. That cultivator did his best to avoid them, but in the end, he still couldn't escape. One of the confinement talismans hidden in the fireball talismans was stuck directly in front of his chest. With a whoosh, this cultivator, like his junior martial brother, rapidly fell down. Xiao Hua also dodged a confinement talisman that had exploded in front of him and quickly chased after this cultivator with the devil spear in hand. This cultivator was hit by the confinement talisman and his body was tightly bound. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't break free in the slightest. He could only watch helplessly as Xiao Hua flew closer and extended the devil's spear, easily piercing his chest. "Martial uncles, martial uncles?" The voice of the pursuing cultivator from the discipline hall echoed in the air. In his eyes, for 2 6th-layer qi refining martial uncles to catch a 2nd-layer qi refining brat like Xiao Hua was as easy as lifting a hand. That's why he wasn't worried in the slightest as he headed towards this area where sparks were flying. However, before he could clearly see the situation, a gust of wind came from behind him. He only had enough time to turn his head, and all he saw was a black spear tip that suddenly enlarged in front of his eyes. Soon after, he felt pain on his face, and he lost consciousness. That spear tip was the only thing the cultivator from the discipline hall saw before he died. As for the owner of the spear tip, even the dead cultivator from the discipline hall absolutely didn't believe it was Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua withdrew the spear tip and coldly looked at the corpses of the cultivator from the discipline hall. He didn't have any pity in his heart. Soon after, he flew to the ground and took the storage pouches of the 3 cultivators. He threw everything into the space and stuffed the empty storage pouches into his sleeves. Finally, he used a fireball talisman to destroy the 3 corpses. Only then did he fly into the air, find the possible direction of Li Xiaowen and the others, and chase after them. Compared to Xiao Hua, Li Xiaowen, Fan Daomao, Fu Shu, and Sun Fian were even more shameful. When they saw the Feng clan's disciples surround them from both sides, they immediately flew away. Moreover, they very tacitly flew in all directions and didn't gather in one place. At this time, how could they still have Tianqi's style of facing a common enemy? When they flew far away like stray dogs, they finally realized that the target of the Feng clan's people was Xiaohua. They didn't seem to put Tianqi in their eyes and didn't care about Tianqi's so-called revenge. They didn't have any intention of silencing all of them. And it was just that they didn't have any absolute intention of doing so. Soon after, several people gathered in the direction of Yulian Mountains and gathered together at the foot of a towering mountain. Alas, fellow Taoist Li, our luck isn't good. Fan Daomao sighed and said, when I saw fellow Taoist Ma send Xiaohua to our group that day outside of Jinghua City, I felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, you see, what kind of trouble did he cause? Even going to the Feng clan's EG could attract the Feng clan's disciples. You said that you bought something good and quietly took it away. Why did it have to be seen by the Feng clan? However, this poor Taoist is quite curious, Xiaohua. What kind of treasure did he get that actually made the Feng clan disregard their face and not afraid of spreading the news of EG to the cultivation world? Sun Fian said thoughtfully. Chapter 1368. Only he himself knows what benefits he obtained. In any case, he won't have the chance to speak again in the future. If fellow Taoist wants to know, you should go ask the Feng clan. Li Xiaowen coldly said, I feel that fellow Taoist Xiao is very loyal. Just now, he didn't explain the matter clearly. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be standing here so calmly. Yes, fellow Taoist Li is right. Fu Shu bitterly said, fellow Taoist Xiao is a person with great luck. He was able to calmly escape from the southern color plane and even found Yong Shang's corpse. Even in the small Feng clan's bazaar, he was able to find good things that could make the Feng clan fall out with him. If he could escape today's calamity, we might be able to obtain the treasures and cultivation methods for this heaven's forsaken mission if we were together with him. Bullshit. Sun Fian didn't speak, but once he did, he spoke with a foul mouth. If this guy is dead, then he's dead. Why didn't he give us the 2 silk bags in his storage bag? Yong Shang died and only took 1, but he took 2 in a row. Without 2 silk bags, where would we go to search for treasures? It would be better to just pat our butts and go back to our own homes. Sigh, we can't blame fellow Taoist Xiao. Just now, the Feng clan was too strict. If fellow Taoist Xiao had some free time, he would have given us the silk bags first. Li Xiaowen thought of Xiaohua's abnormality at the beginning and what Xiaohua wanted to say to him. His heart was filled with regret. Presumably, Xiaohua wanted to give him the silk bags at that time. Right now, it's useless to say more. Let's think about how to deal with it. As Fu Shu spoke, he suddenly frowned and looked towards a direction. He curiously said, fellow Taoists, over there seems to be thunder. Did you hear it? Yes, it's true. Although the sound is very soft, it's continuous. Li Xiaowen and the others also curiously looked towards that direction. There's no sound. In a flash, Sun Fian said, maybe our fellow Taoist Xiao is stubbornly resisting. The fireball talisman he accidentally bought from the bazaar is showing its might. But what's the use of it? How can a 2nd-level Qi refining kid be a match for a 6th-level Qi refinement cultivator? Even we can't avoid it. Won't he be captured obediently? I'm afraid we can't return to Feng Station. The Feng clan wants to take something important from Xiaohua. If we go back, we'll be walking right into their trap. Li Xiaowen ignored Sun Fian's cold words and said in a low voice, perhaps, should we look for some old friends who are familiar with the Feng clan? We only want the 2 silk bags in Xiaohua's storage pouch. Everything else will be given to the Feng clan. Moreover, we'll just treat it as if Xiaohua died in the southern color plains? Sun Fian asked for a snub and said again, it's possible, but won't the heavenly forsaken be implicated in the matter of the spinneret? This operation is very secretive. Li Xiaowen frowned. Everyone looked at each other and talked for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, but they still couldn't come up with a good idea. Just as everyone was frowning, a figure flew over their heads at an extremely fast speed and headed straight for the Yulian Mountains. An 11th level Qi refinement senior? Fu Shu was the first to notice and hurriedly pointed with his finger. Look at his flying speed. Sun Fian's eyes were somewhat envious. This is Xiao. Fellow Taoist Zhao's figure. Li Xiaowen looked at the back of the figure that he suspected to be an 11th level Qi refinement cultivator and suddenly stammered. The degree of stammering really caught up with the Feng clan's Xiaohua. Isn't that? That's fellow Taoist Zhao's Taoist robe. Fan Daomao also exclaimed. Quickly stop him. Sun Fian immediately shouted. But just as they hesitated and flew into the air again, Xiaohua had already flown far away. With their flying speed, how could they catch up? Quick, consecutive note talisman. Li Xiaowen suddenly thought. He slapped his storage pouch and took out the consecutive note talisman. Urging his magic power, the consecutive note talisman quickly flew in the direction of Xiaohua. It really is fellow Taoist Xiao? Sun Fian only now truly believed it. Let's go, we'll welcome him. The expression on Li Xiaowen's face was somewhat strange. It really wasn't easy to express with words, and the others were the same. Sure enough, in no more than a moment, Xiaohua's thin and tall figure appeared in everyone's field of vision. However, as everyone expected, his flying speed was already extremely slow, about the same as their flying speed. Seeing Xiaohua turn around, Li Xiaowen hurriedly stepped forward and opened his mouth. It was unknown what he wanted to say, but he rolled his eyes and laughed. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I and the others have been waiting here for a long time. Hee, I've troubled fellow Taoists to wait for so long. I'm truly ashamed. Xiaohua's expression didn't change as he also cupped his hands and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao. Feng clan? Sun Fian actually didn't want to ask, but he really couldn't help it. He couldn't imagine that just a moment ago, Xiaohua was still an insignificant little cultivator, but in the blink of an eye, he became so mysterious. He actually flew so fast, and actually escaped from the hands of 2 6th-level Qi condensation cultivators. Moreover, looking at Xiaohua's leisurely appearance and the sound just now, those 2 cultivators, no, 3 cultivators, perhaps, all pointed to disaster? However, the Xiaohua in front of him just happened to be at the 2nd level of Qi condensation, and he simply didn't conceal it in the slightest. Could it be that this guy is a senior who hides his strength? At the same time he asked, such a thought suddenly popped into Sun Fian's mind. But when he thought of Xiaohua's knowledge and experience that were very consistent with his cultivation, Sun Fian inwardly denied it. Oh, Feng clan. Xiaohua smiled very meaningfully. After everyone left first, I reasoned with them, laid out the facts, and explained the whole sequence of events in full detail. They were aware that they were too impulsive and knew that they had wrongly accused I. After repeatedly bowing and apologizing to I, they returned. Huh? Li Xiaowen and the others heard this, and their faces were all strange. Oh, right, the Feng clan's disciples also told I to tell fellow Taoists that they have disturbed everyone. They are very sorry. If you have the opportunity to come to Feng Station next time, they would like to invite fellow Taoists to Feng clan for a chat. They will do their best to entertain you. Xiaohua's words were very colorful, and his eyes contained a smiling expression. The 4 people didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and didn't know how to respond. Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed an expert, who convinces people with reason. After a long while, Li Xiaowen muttered, Indeed, I really am an expert who convinces people with force. Xiaohua grinned, showing his snow-white teeth. Okay, since fellow Taoist Xiao has returned, we have nothing to worry about. Fu Shu's bitter face finally had a trace of a smile. I feel guilty. I should have given the silk bag to fellow Taoist Li, but Xiaohua smiled. No need, that silk bag is very safe with fellow Taoist Xiao, I can rest assured. Li Xiaowen quickly waved his hand and said, Then what are we waiting for? Let's quickly go to Yulian Mountain? Xiaohua smiled and said, Yes, yes, let's go quickly. Li Xiaowen and the others suddenly realized that this was still the Feng clan's territory. Although Xiao Hua said that he convinced people with reason and that the Feng clan would no longer pursue this matter, who would be so brainless to believe it? If they didn't hurry now, when the Feng clan caught up, Xiao Hua could escape, but what about them? However, just as this thought arose in everyone's eyes, they immediately thought that since Xiao Hua's flying speed was so fast, then when he encountered the Feng clan disciples, he should have been able to escape. However, he didn't fly away and led the Feng clan disciples to another place. Then, what did Xiao Hua do? Everyone didn't think that Xiao Hua abandoned his own safety for the sake of being abandoned by the heavens. Immediately, they tensed up their guesses, and a trace of cold sweat quietly appeared on their backs. On the road again, Xiao Hua's speed was still about the same as theirs, but Li Xiaowen and the others didn't dare to leave Xiao Hua behind, and rather respectfully invited Xiao Hua to fly at the front. Seeing this scene, Xiao Hua knew that his matter had been somewhat exposed, but his current state of mind was already somewhat different from a month ago. First, in the past, he had only stayed at Yellow Flower Ridge, then came to Jinghua City. Of course, when he was at Yellow Flower Ridge, he also went to Medicine Farmer Peak, which caused Xiao Hua's vision to be narrow. Although Zhang Qingxiao previously said how big the Xiaoyu continent was, Xiao Hua didn't have a direct impression. Therefore, he previously tried his best to conceal himself, wanting to avoid the 100 Herbs clan's pursuit. However, during this period of time in Jinghua City, and from the time he left Jinghua City until today, he truly experienced the vastness of the Xiaoyu continent. Moreover, this was only the country of Shi, a mere rogue cultivator organization, heaven-forsaken's operation, yet he ran for so long and encountered so many things. The key point was that after doing so many things, he wasn't recognized by the 100 Herbs clan disciples at all. Outside of E-City, he hadn't even seen a 100 Herbs clan disciple. Since he couldn't meet a 100 Herbs clan disciple, what was he afraid of? Who knew who Xiao Hua was? Secondly, Xiao Hua successively obtained talisman crafting methods, pill recipes, and the recently obtained pill concoction method. These were things that even cultivator aristocratic families coveted. With these things, Xiao Hua wasn't afraid that he wouldn't have a direction in his cultivation, nor was he afraid that he wouldn't be able to exchange these things for cultivation techniques. Thirdly, Xiao Hua obtained a large pile of Peiyuan pill, Spirit Awakening pill, and Clear Ripple pill that could increase his power. Relying on these pills, he could easily raise his cultivation to the 3rd layer of Qi refining. If Heaven-Forsaken's operation this time went smoothly, he would be able to obtain some benefits from it. Even if there weren't any benefits, as long as he stayed in Heaven's Forsaken for a while, he would be able to get his hands on some 3rd layer aura refining cultivation method and some medicinal pills. Then, reaching the 4th and 5th layers of aura refining wouldn't be impossible. In the end, what made Xiao Hua the most confident was that, relying on his speed, the heavy spear tip, and his immense strength, even a 6th layer Qi refining cultivator was easily killed by him. Once his cultivation reached the 4th or 5th layer, perhaps even a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator would be no match for him. Then, why would he be afraid of being hunted down by the 100 Herbs sect? Chapter 1369. After Xiao Hua figured it out, he immediately felt that this Dawn Rain continent was vast and that he could go anywhere he wanted. For a moment, he was filled with lofty sentiments. His flying speed slowly increased, almost as if he wanted to leave everyone behind. Li Xiaowen and the others chased closely behind, urging their magic power to barely keep up. When the magic power in their bodies was almost exhausted, Xiao Hua was still leading the way as if nothing had happened. Li Xiaowen and the others unconsciously looked at each other in dismay, exclaiming from the bottom of their hearts, "This? Is he really at the 2nd level of Qi refinement?" Fellow Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Li Xiaowen shouted loudly, not lacking a trace of respect. Fellow Taoist Li, why did you call me? When Xiao Hua heard the call, he slowed down and asked curiously. But when he turned around and saw everyone chasing after him, he immediately came to his senses and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoists, This poor Taoist was thinking about something, but I was rude. Cough, cough. Fellow Taoist Xiao leading the way isn't bad. Li Xiaowen caught up, his face somewhat strange. But fellow Taoist, your direction is wrong. The more you walk, the further you go. Thief. Xiao Hua laughed embarrassedly, saying with extreme embarrassment, then I'll ask fellow Taoist Li to lead the way. I'll still be at the back. Everyone was unwilling, still wanting Xiao Hua to fly in the middle. How could Xiao Hua be long-winded with them? He said somewhat impatiently, I's cultivation is the most shallow. I still want to comprehend cultivation at the back. Seniors, please lead the way. You're still calling your cultivation shallow? 2 6th level Qi refinement experts are in your hands, their fates unknown. Everyone cursed in their hearts, but they also didn't dare to force Xiao Hua. They could only do the same as before, letting Xiao Hua follow behind. Everyone's order was the same as before, but the situation was as different as heaven and earth. With someone leading the way in front, Xiao Hua's heart felt a lot more at ease. He just casually flew at the back, free and unfettered as before. Sun Fian and the others occasionally turned their heads, but Xiao Hua simply ignored them. He knew that these loose cultivators all put their own interests above everything else. Even if he took a few pieces of top-grade spirit stones from them, they might not necessarily take this sentiment to heart. If I had known this would happen, I would have taken those spirit stones a few days ago. Xiao Hua was somewhat regretful in his heart. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua took out the 5 pill recipes from his sleeve and looked at them one by one. Xiao Hua's heart almost jumped out of his chest. It was no wonder that the Feng clan wanted to do such a despicable thing, and it was no wonder that the rogue cultivator wanted to quickly get rid of them. These 5 books. Not only were there pill recipes, there were also 2 books related to alchemy techniques. Because he was in the air, Xiao Hua didn't look at them in detail. However, based on a cursory glance, Xiao Hua knew that these 5 books must belong to some alchemist. As long as he could comprehend these 5 books and obtain the pill furnace, he would definitely be able to refine pills. I don't know which sex alchemist was killed by that bastard. Xiao Hua sneered. If someone were to find out, they would definitely come out to hunt him down. No wonder he wanted to get rid of it so quickly. And this thing can't be given to the Feng clan yet. After the Feng clan obtains it, the first person they will silence is that rogue cultivator. Xiao Hua once again understood why the rogue cultivator didn't sell the alchemy technique to the Feng clan. This young master got lucky. Xiao Hua put the 5 books into his space, then touched his nose and secretly pondered, perhaps that bastard also has the intention of shifting the disaster outside, but is this young master afraid of this? Soon after, Xiao Hua immersed his mind into the space and organized the things of the 3 disciples of the Feng clan. The storage pouches of the 3 disciples of the Feng clan were all low-level goods, and there weren't many things inside. There were some spirit stones, some common medicinal pills and yellow talismans, and then there were a few books. Xiao Hua still threw the spirit stones and yellow talismans to the side and cut the books first. However, after looking through them, he was slightly disappointed. There wasn't a single book related to cultivation methods. However, Xiao Hua wasn't without any harvest. Among these books, one recorded some small spells that the disciples of the Feng clan often used, one recorded materials for refining tools, and one recorded a spell called Thunder Palm. What made Xiao Hua the happiest was that in the middle of this book, there was actually a topographic map of the Feng residence. Inside the map, there was the internal and external structure of the Feng residence, as well as where there were restrictions and where there were secret rooms. Everything was clearly written. Hey, Feng clan, you're out of luck. Who told you to provoke this young master? Wait until I'm free, see how this young master will bring disaster to your Feng clan. Xiao Hua carefully looked at the topographic map and coldly smiled. Next, Xiao Hua looked at the Thunder Palm. This spell was a real spell and didn't rely on yellow talismans to cast it. He didn't know which disciple of the Feng clan had it. Since it was a real spell, the requirements were also very high. In addition to the requirements of cultivation and magic power, there was also a high requirement for the spell's comprehension. Xiaohua only looked at it roughly and threw it into the space. Even a sixth-layer qi refining cultivator couldn't cultivate it, so how could his magic power be comparable to the thunder palm? The last thing Xiaohua looked at was also the most practical. It was the book of basic spells that the disciples of the Feng clan often used. Inside, there were spells used by ordinary cultivators such as the flame technique, water flow technique, object controlling technique, and so on. There was even a method to make a summoning talisman. Xiaohua didn't look at it carefully and only roughly flipped through it. His heart was blooming with joy. This was what he needed the most besides cultivation methods. It wasn't that Shang Huaming didn't have these spells, but Xiaohua didn't enter Shang Huaming's door. Although he stayed in Yellow Flower Ridge for 3 years, he didn't learn a single one. At this moment, it seemed that this book of basic spells was Xiaohua's biggest harvest from killing the disciples of the Feng clan this time. Xiaohua flew with Li Xiaowen and the others for a long time. When Xiaohua finished organizing the things he just obtained, Li Xiaowen and the others stopped and wanted to rest. This time, the rest was different. Li Xiaowen first greeted Xiaohua and listened to his opinion. Xiaohua shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist Li, you can do whatever you want. This poor Taoist doesn't have any opinion. In the future, don't ask this poor Taoist." When they landed in the forest, Xiaohua hid to the side and took out the book of basic spells from the space. He read it with relish. He ignored the eyes of the others who were secretly looking at him from afar and wanted to talk to him. When everyone saw this, they knew that Xiaohua didn't want to talk to them anymore. They closed their eyes and adjusted their breathing to recover their magic power as soon as possible. After the time it took to eat a meal, everyone got up and flew until nightfall. They stopped at a plain. "Have we arrived?" Xiaohua looked left and right. He didn't know where Yulian Mountain was. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this place is still some distance away from Yulian Mountain." Li Xiaowen smiled and pointed at a foggy area in front of him. "That mountain covered in fog is Yulian Mountain. It's not too far, but it's hard to see clearly." Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. "This Yulian Mountain is covered in fog all day long. It's hard to see within a radius of 3 kilometers. It's really dangerous." Sun Fian whispered. Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, "Yulian Mountain, can we go around it?" Li Xiaowen nodded. Fellow Taoist Xiao asked a very good question. This is also what I wanted to say. Yulian Mountain is not like South Color Plain. We can go around it. We only need to go to the outer area of Yulian Mountain and open the silk bag that fellow Taoist Ma gave us. Once we know the next location, we can immediately come out and go around it. Although Yulian Mountain is a place where fog grows and there are many fog beasts inside, if we don't provoke them, what can they do? Yes, that's how it should be. Fan Daomao said happily. Why is fellow Taoist Fan so happy? Sun Fian sneered. Could it be that we need to go around it and enter Yulian Mountain just to open the silk bag? Without the silk bag, you don't need to go in? Fan Daomao glanced at Sun Fian and smiled. That's natural. I's silk bag has already been opened. There's no point in entering Yulian Mountain. Then why should I go in? So you're saying that only one fellow Taoist can enter the last location. Everyone else doesn't need to go in? Sun Fian immediately asked. Fan Daomao was at a loss for words. If it was as he thought, only the cultivator with the last silk bag that hadn't been opened could enter the last location. What was the point of others going in? Li Xiaowen waved his hand and smiled. Fellow Taoist Sun is right. We're a group and should advance and retreat together. Tomorrow, fellow Taoist Fan of Yulian Mountain will also enter with us. Fan Daomao thought for a moment and silently nodded. All right, everyone, it's best to enter Yulian Mountain at noon. We'll rest here for the night and depart tomorrow. Li Xiaowen looked at everyone and said, Fellow Taoists, it's best to rest early. Then, just like before, Li Xiaowen used the warning talisman and sat in the center of everyone, closing his eyes and meditating. Xiaohua was the same as before. Seeing that they were resting, he immediately sat down cross-legged and took a marrow-cleansing pill. He worked hard to refine the medicinal power and improve his cultivation. Currently, he had enough medicinal pills. What he lacked was time. In the blink of an eye, it was the morning of the next day. By the time everyone got up, Xiaohua had already refined 5 marrow-cleansing pills. This time, everyone saw that Xiaohua's cultivation had improved. They could no longer remain indifferent. Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao, your cultivation has improved again. Li Xiaowen said very happily. Fellow Taoist Li is too polite. My cultivation is really not in your eyes. It's better if you don't mock I. Although Xiaohua said this, he didn't feel the slightest bit ashamed. Li Xiaowen and the others also didn't look down on him in the slightest. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I'm afraid you didn't find a suitable cultivation method in the past and only built a cart behind closed doors in your abode, right? You've only come out of Jinghua City for a few days and your cultivation is already comparable to several months of our previous cultivation. Fellow Taoist Xiao, your future is limitless. Fan Daomao was very moved. With all of you seniors in front, I really don't dare to be negligent. I only hope that my cultivation can catch up with all of you seniors in my lifetime. I will be satisfied. Xiaohua said modestly. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. Chapter 1370. This young master has taken so many marrow-cleansing pills. It's equivalent to cultivating bitterly for several years. But when it comes to you, you only take it as increasing your cultivation for several months. Why is this young master's life so bitter? Xiaohua silently cursed. Therefore, Xiaohua flew at the back of the group, immersing himself in the foundational techniques he had just learned yesterday. However, before he could make a name for himself, they arrived at the Yulian Mountains. The Yulian Mountains were just as Li Xiaowen and the others had said. The mountain wasn't very tall, but the fog was extremely thick. From afar, it looked like a huge cloud had fallen from the 9 heavens onto the mortal world. What a big cotton candy! Xiaohua raised his head and couldn't help but groan. The person flying in front of Xiaohua was Sun Fian. Xiaohua's sigh just happened to be heard by him. Sun Fian, who was originally flying very confidently, twisted a few times and almost fell from the sky. Fellow Taoist Sun, be careful. Xiaohua promptly reminded him. Sun Fian had a strange expression on his face. He turned around and cupped his hands. Thank you for your concern, fellow Taoist Xiao. Then, he bit his lip and used all his strength to fly forward. Below Xiaohua and the others was a plain. It really felt as if it stretched as far as the eye could see. And right above this plain, the Yulian Mountains, which were shrouded in clouds and mist, appeared very abruptly, giving people a very strange feeling. Especially when Xiaohua and the others flew over from the sky. If they didn't mention the dangers of the Yulian Mountains, it would be a strange place. Fellow Taoist fan, seeing that they were already near the Yulian Mountains, the clouds and mist in the mountains were constantly rolling like 10,000 galloping horses, but after going out of a certain range, the clouds and mist immediately dispersed, disappearing under the dazzling sunlight. They couldn't see any monsters. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He looked at Fan Daomao, who had landed beside him, and asked softly, Fellow Taoist Fan, fellow Taoist Xiao, is something the matter? Fan Daomao's face was full of smiles. Xiaohua wasn't polite. He pointed at the cloud and mist and asked, Yesterday, fellow Taoist Li said that there were many cloud beasts on the Yulian Mountains. How come I haven't seen them? This cloud mist beast, what does it look like? I see. Fan Daomao didn't have a strange expression on his face when he heard this. He smiled and said, It's no wonder that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't know. This Yulian Mountain isn't like the southern color plains. It's not a place that people have to pass. Therefore, it's not very famous and not many people know about it. I happen to have an extremely good friend. 2 years ago, because he was picking grass from a stream, he had no choice but to enter the Yulian Mountains. He also had a narrow escape in the Yulian Mountains. When he returned, he complained to I. This time, I learned how powerful the cloud beast is. Shilian grass must be a specialty of the Yulian Mountains. What is it used for? Xiaohua looked like he was thirsty for knowledge. To let fellow Taoist Xiao know, the The Yulian Mountains are shrouded in clouds all year round, and the water attribute spiritual energy is very dense. This spiritual energy is also very dense, so sunlight can't penetrate it. This is the best place for creek grass to grow. In our country of Shi, only the Yulian Mountains are rich in creek grass. As for the Shi Lian herb, it was only a necessary ingredient for the cultivation of spiritual sense. Therefore, it's normal that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't know. Cultivation of spiritual sense? Xiao Hua stared blankly and asked curiously, this spiritual sense can also be cultivated. Fan Daomao shook his head slightly. I am only in the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm. There's still a long way to go before I reach the peak of the Qi refining realm. Naturally, I don't know if it's true or not. It's just hearsay. Fellow Taoist fan, tell me more. Xiao Hua suddenly thought of the incantation he obtained. It had the effect of refreshing the mind. He couldn't help but become interested. He had already put the matter of the cloud beast to the back of his mind. It's said that when spiritual sense reaches the 12th layer of the Qi refining realm, it will be formed in the cultivator's Naiwan palace. This spiritual sense is the foundation for controlling magic tools and magic weapons. If one's spiritual sense is strong, it will be like an ordinary person's strength. In a fight, it will be very advantageous. However, the cultivation methods we usually practice can only increase our cultivation level. Our spiritual sense will only increase with our cultivation level. Fundamentally speaking, it has no effect on the improvement of our spiritual sense. Because of this, some people with great divine abilities have created their own cultivation methods to cultivate spiritual sense. It's like cultivating the body, walking the path of body cultivators. Oh right. Fellow Taoist fan, you mentioned body cultivators. I have also heard of them, but I've never seen one. I heard they are all big and rough people. Is that true? Would fellow Taoist fan like this? Xiao Hua thought of Zhang Jihao calling him a body cultivator. Although they were already in front of Yu Lianshan, Fan Daomao didn't seem to be impatient. He said, I have seen a few body cultivators before. They were all big and rough people. However, it's said that when they cultivate to the depth, they are not much different from ordinary cultivators. Actually, when it comes to body cultivators, there are 2 theories. The first is that in the primordial era, there were no magic spells, only innate divine abilities. Everyone had the body of a celestial being. Just like the fog in the early morning, Xiao Hua followed Li Xiaowen and the others to the edge of Yulian Mountain. When everyone's figures were swallowed up by the fog, Xiao Hua's vision also started to become a vast expanse of white. Naturally, this was different from ordinary white fog. Ordinary white fog was faint. As soon as people approached it, they would be blown away by the sound of the wind. However, this fog was dense, almost as if it had settled in the air. Not only did it block people's vision, it also covered people's mouths and noses. A kind of rotten, fishy smell mixed with some decadent fragrance rushed over. When Xiao Hua smelled this strange smell, he immediately sealed his mouth and nose, not letting a trace of it enter his body. However, this wasn't what worried Xiao Hua the most. The strangest thing was that the fog seemed to be able to completely block his vision. Although Xiao Hua's 5 senses were sharp, he could only see about 3 feet around him. Moreover, as everyone went deeper, this range was still shrinking. Strange, if we go inside, wouldn't we be unable to see anything? Xiao Hua pondered. This is creek grass? Xiao Hua lowered his head slightly and saw a small blade of grass that was 1 inch tall. There were 3 leaves at the top, and each leaf had a saw-like edge. There were fine hairs growing on the edge of the saw-like edge. The hairs were slightly trembling in the clouds. It was unknown whether it was the clouds or the grass that was moving. Fellow Taoist Sun, Xiao Hua whispered, This is creek grass? Hearing this, Sun Fian followed Xiao Hua's finger and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed lucky. This is indeed creek grass. I have seen it before at Jinghua City's e.g. Xiao Hua looked at the jealous expression on Sun Fian's face and felt comfortable in his heart. Of course, this creek grass was under everyone's feet. Only Xiaohua saw it. The others actually didn't notice it. Not good, this place. Why is there creek grass? Sun Fian waited for Xiaohua to quickly pick the creek grass and immediately whispered again. Chapter 1371. What? Creek-link grass? Li Xiaowen was a few steps ahead of Sun Fian. Hearing his surprised voice, he quickly turned around and asked, "There's creek-link grass here?" "Yes, fellow Taoist Li, could it be that there's something wrong?" Seeing this, Xiaohua was startled. He faintly felt that something was wrong, so he took out the creek-link grass. Sure enough, it really is the legendary creek-link grass. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen frowned. He looked at Sun Fian and said, "Fellow Taoist Sun must know that this creek-link grass is the favorite food of the cloud beast. I've only heard that it grows in the depths of the Yulian Mountains. This is only the edge, how could it be here?" Sun Fian was also worried. He quickly said, "Fellow Taoist Li, let's hurry up and take out our silk bags. If we can open one, we'll quickly leave. I feel a bit uneasy." "I also think so," Li Xiaowen said crisply. "Fellow Taoists, let's not rush in first. Take out your silk bags and try." However, everyone took out their silk bags, but not a single one opened. Xiaohua looked at the 2 silk bags in his hands, his expression somewhat ugly. He originally thought that if he took one more, he would have more to rely on. Now it seemed that this might not be the case. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen said in a low voice, "Presumably, we still need to go deeper into the Yulian Mountains. Everyone, hold your silk bags in your hands. Let's go and watch." Thus, everyone followed Li Xiaowen's words. As they quietly walked in, they paid attention to the silk bags in their hands. Xiaohua looked at Fu Shu, who was walking at the back. He looked at his silk bag that didn't seem to move, then looked at the thick clouds around them. He asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist fan, just now? I still haven't finished speaking. The cloud beast? What does it look like?" Fu Shu stared at his silk bag. He raised his eyelids and said in a low voice, "This cloud beast. As the name suggests, it's a demonic beast born from clouds. This thing doesn't have a fixed shape. When mixed with ordinary clouds, it's impossible to distinguish it. Only Qi refining 12th layer or foundation establishment seniors can see it with their divine sense. We can't see it with our eyes. So it's like this." Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. It was as if he was surrounded by cloud mist beasts. "Don't be afraid, fellow Taoist Xiao. The cloud mist beasts are born from the essence of the clouds. Most of them live in the depths of the universe mountains and don't dare to leave easily. Otherwise, fellow Taoist Qing wouldn't have let us come here." Fu Shu mocked himself. A mature cloud mist beast is a second-rank spiritual beast, comparable to a 10th layer Qi practitioner like me. How could it be unstoppable? "A mature cloud mist beast?" Xiaohua said curiously. "The cloud beast is similar to this ordinary cloud. How did it grow?" "A newborn cloud mist beast is about the size of a fist," he said. "Its cultivation base is about the same as that of a second-level Qi refining cultivator like me. As time passes, it absorbs more cloud mist quintessence. Its body grows larger and its cultivation base becomes more profound. When it reaches the 6th level of Qi refining, the cloud mist beasts will begin to devour each other. Every time it devours another cloud mist beast, its cultivation will increase by a bit. When it has devoured enough, it will mature." When Xiaohua heard this, he smiled and said, "There's actually such a miraculous thing. You can increase your cultivation just by eating." Of course, not only do cloud mist beasts devour their own kind, they also devour cultivators. A trace of fear appeared on Fu Shu's face. "What? Devour cultivators?" When Xiaohua heard this, he was also shocked. At this moment, an extremely weak divine sense faintly swept across Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua abruptly stopped in his tracks and looked around in panic. "Fellow Taoist Xiao? What's wrong?" Fu Shu asked curiously. Xiaohua paused for a moment. that feeling disappeared. Could it be that I was too nervous? No, it's nothing. Xiao Hua forced a smile. Before he could finish speaking, Fu Shu's surprised voice came from the front. Fellow Taoists, my silk pouch has changed. When Xiao Hua and the others heard this, they were all overjoyed. They quickly gathered around Fu Shu. At this moment, the silk pouch in Fu Shu's hand faintly emitted a light blue brilliance. Specks of fluorescent light danced up and down as if it had a life of its own. However, this fluorescent light constantly scattered in all directions. It was very eye-catching in the milky white cloud mist, but it didn't make any sound. Fellow Taoist Fu, it's better for us to walk forward a bit. Li Xiaowen reminded. AI, that's right. I was thinking the same thing. Fu Shu bitterly smiled and slowly walked forward. But Xiao Hua thought of his previous feeling and had a very bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, as Li Xiaowen walked forward, the light blue brilliance became denser and denser. Slowly, it became like the surrounding clouds. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, a sizzled sound was heard. It was as if boiling water had been poured on snow. The fluorescent light fiercely boiled, and Qing Fengmin's familiar voice came. Fellow Taoists, thank you for your hard work. The next place we need to go is Yunshi Marsh. Please continue to work hard. I will be waiting for you at the destination. Qing Fengmin's voice disappeared, and the brilliance of the silk pouch also disappeared. Alright. Fellow Taoist Fu, put away the silk pouch. Li Xiaowen said with a smile. We finally have an easy place to go. Xiao Hua didn't know where Yunshi Marsh was, but he vaguely saw that Li Xiaowen and the others' faces were relaxed. He knew that this place wasn't too dangerous, so he quickly walked back with the others. After walking a few steps, Xiao Hua felt more and more that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell exactly what was wrong. So he said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Li, why don't we use the consecutive note talisman? Let's look at the direction and hurry back. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I have a plan in mind. We came straight here and went straight back. We didn't encounter any accidents on the way, so we won't use the consecutive note talisman. That consecutive note talisman, it'll be used less each time. So it's like that? Xiao Hua bit his lip and took a deep breath. It's nothing. Then he looked at Fu Shu beside him and asked, Fellow Taoist fan, that cloud mist beast, what does it look like when it swallows cultivators? Fellow Taoist Xiao, when did you become so timid? Fu Shu also looked relaxed at this moment. He smiled and said, this place is still far from the depths of Yulian Mountains. The cloud mist beast won't come here. On the other hand, fellow Taoist Xiao is so noisy. Maybe it really will attract the cloud mist beast. Sun Fian said with a smile. But Xiao Hua's heart was still not relaxed. He still asked, fellow Taoist fan, please enlighten me. How does the cloud mist beast swallow cultivators? It's very strange when you talk about it. Fu Shu looked around and said with a smile, the cloud mist beast is born from clouds and mist. Clouds and mist are made of clouds and mist, so they don't have any specific form. I have only heard that the way the cloud mist beast swallows cultivators is very mysterious. It's the most difficult to detect. This is bad. Fellow Taoists, have you heard any rumors? Or have there been any sounds? Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. Along the way, the clouds and mist were indeed dense, but there was also a slight breeze and even the rustling of leaves and grass. But at this moment, it was simply deathly still. Ah? Everyone heard and cried out in alarm. Fellow Taoist Xiao, what do you feel under your feet? Li Xiaowen also cried out involuntarily. Hearing this, Xiao Hua realized that although it was soft just now, he could clearly feel the grass and soil under his feet. But now, it was as if he was stepping on cotton. Consecutive note talisman. Xiao Hua slapped his storage bag and was about to take out the consecutive note talisman, but Sun Fian's hands were even faster. The consecutive note talisman had already been sent out. What made everyone's hearts jump was that the consecutive note talisman only flew about a foot in the air. It actually spun in the air and didn't fly forward anymore. What do we do? What do we do? Xiao Hua's heart beat wildly. Thinking that he was actually in the stomach of the cloud mist beast, he couldn't help but feel his mouth go dry. Needless to say, that faintly discernible divine sense just now was definitely there. It was a mature cloud mist beast that had attacked them, and the way this cloud mist beast attacked them was really strange. It actually swallowed everyone into its body without them even realizing it. Fu Shu hurriedly flew up and said, "Quick, let's hurry and fly out of Yulian Mountain." Although the cloud mist beast is powerful, but it doesn't have a physical body. If we fly out of its body before it swallows our magic power, we should be able to escape. Hearing this, Xiaohua was shocked. He silently used his cultivation technique to check. Sure enough, the true qi in his body was disappearing little by little. Looking at the others again, although they looked blurry, they all had panicked expressions. Following Fu Shu's flying figure, they all chased after him. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He activated the flying talisman, looked at Fu Shu's back, and chased after him in one breath. However, a strange thing happened again. Xiaohua's speed was much faster than Fu Shu's. According to Xiaohua's estimation, he only needed a few breaths of time to catch up, or even surpass, but Fu Shu's back was right in front of Xiaohua. No matter how Xiaohua activated his magic power, he couldn't catch up even a little bit. Oh no! Seeing this, Xiaohua knew that there was a problem. His body suddenly stopped, but Fu Shu's back was still in the fog not far away. Xiaohua's eyes narrowed, and his eyelids twitched. He stared at Fu Shu's back, not knowing what he was thinking. After a moment, Xiaohua clenched his teeth, took out the devil's spear from the space, and held it in his hand. He turned around and activated his magic power, pouring it all into the flying talisman. His body was like lightning, quickly flying into the depths of Yulian Mountain. Xiaohua's flying speed was originally comparable to the 11th or 2nd layer of qi refining. At this time, he was flying at full speed. He felt as if countless clouds and fog were being pierced through by him, and an empty passage was being drilled through by him. However, the faster Xiaohua flew, the faster the true qi in his body flowed out, and his dermic powers were also consumed at a similarly fast rate. Chapter 1372. Xiaohua's heart was filled with ruthlessness. He waved his hand and took out a marrow-cleansing pill from the space. He swallowed it in one gulp and silently operated his cultivation method. On one hand, he refined the medicinal efficacy of the marrow-cleansing pill to supplement the loss of true qi in his meridians. On the other hand, he stirred up his magic power and flew forward. Normally, Xiaohua would need 4 hours to refine the medicinal power of the marrow-cleansing pill. But now that it was a matter of life and death, he couldn't care about anything else. He urged his true qi to circulate in his meridians, rapidly refining the medicinal power. After the medicinal power was refined, the true qi was transformed into magic power to support Xiaohua's flight. On the other hand, it made up for the true qi that had been swallowed by the fog beast. Soon, in the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the marrow-cleansing pill was refined. The time it took was much shorter than usual. Logically speaking, Xiaohua's meridians should have been overwhelmed by such a barbaric refinement of the marrow-cleansing pill and circulating true qi in his meridians without regard for anything else. It should have even caused some damage. But, contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, his meridians were abnormally tough. He didn't feel any discomfort at all. Refining the marrow-cleansing pill like this was just enough to make up for the loss of true qi. Xiaohua knew that now was not the time to hesitate. He sent another marrow-cleansing pill into the air and maintained his original flight speed, constantly flying into the depths of Yulian Mountains. In Xiaohua's perception, he was flying in a straight line, but the real situation was not like this. In a huge mass of clouds, Xiaohua's flight path was an extremely irregular circle. This circle was tightly wrapped in the clouds. Similarly, in the middle of Xiaohua's circle, Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, and Sun Fian were the same as Xiaohua, each of them flying around an irregular circle with great effort. They were the same as Xiaohua, all of them recklessly taking out medicinal pills that could replenish their true energy from their storage pouches. However, they were different from Xiaohua. Their faces were extremely panicked, and there was even some despair in their eyes. In particular, Fu Shu's cultivation was slightly weaker than the other two, and the range of his flight was also smaller. After 6 hours, when the medicinal pills in his storage bag were used up, the speed of his flight gradually slowed down, and the rate at which his true qi was flowing out also gradually increased. Seeing that he could no longer replenish his qi, Fu Shu's face turned red. He clapped his hands and the fireball talisman he bought from the Feng clan's EG appeared. He activated his Fa Li and threw it out. What made Fu Shu despair was that the fireball talisman that would normally explode as soon as it was thrown out was currently wrapped up by the thick, watery cloud just as it was in midair. Only a faint flame flashed before it was annihilated. No. Fu Shu screamed in fear, but his voice only traveled a short distance. Immediately after, Fu Shu seemed to have gone mad. He took out all the yellow talismans he had and threw them all out without caring about the loss of his Fa. Unfortunately, all the yellow talismans were like clay oxen entering the sea. They couldn't even set off half a wave, and Fu Shu's true qi was exhausted in this final struggle. Following the exhaustion of his true qi, Fu Shu no longer had a trace of magic power to activate the flying talisman. His entire body fell to the ground. Oh, perhaps it couldn't be said to be the ground anymore, but rather the slightly trembling cloud. This cloud was ice cold. When Fu Shu's body fell, his face immediately turned pale. Because he didn't have any magic power to defend himself, the cloud immediately wrapped around his body. Fu Shu only had time to struggle a few times before he lost all his strength. Soon after, he was swallowed by the white, viscous cloud and disappeared without a trace. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were with Fu Shu. Their cultivations were slightly higher than Fu Shu's, but their circumstances weren't much better. At this time, they were also at the end of their rope. They were clenching their teeth and making a final, futile struggle. Looking at Xiaohua again, in the span of 6 hours, he had already finished consuming the remaining 20 or so marrow-cleansing pills he had obtained from Yongshang. He had even taken another 10 marrow-cleansing pills that he had just obtained from the Feng family's EG. His true energy was maintained, and his magic power was also maintained. However, his cultivation base was continuously improving along with the circulation of his true energy and the refinement of the medicinal power. And with the increase of his cultivation, Xiaohua's flying speed became even faster. As Xiaohua's flying speed increased, the circle he was flying in also continuously increased in size. He gradually approached the edge of the huge cloud, after Fu Shu disappeared, in the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiaohua took another marrow-cleansing pill. Just as he finished refining the marrow-cleansing pill, his speed suddenly increased. His figure, which was originally flying in a circle, suddenly rushed out in a straight line. Not only that, just as he was flying in a straight line, the tip of the demonic spear that Xiaohua had been holding in his hand all this time seemed to have been pierced by a layer of faintly discernible membrane. With a kind of faint schwat sound, the clouds and mist around Xiaohua began to violently boil. The boiling rapidly spread, and the clouds and mist within a radius of several thousand zhang were churning. Xiaohua, who had been observing the true qi in his body all this time, didn't seem to know that he was already flying in a straight line. All he knew was that he was extremely pleasantly surprised to see that his true qi had suddenly increased. The true qi produced by refining the marrow-cleansing pill didn't seem to have leaked out. Did I rush out? Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised as he thought, this young master has been flying for 6 hours. I'm afraid that I've traveled several thousand li? This cloud mist beast. Why is it even bigger than Yu Lianshan? Thinking this, Xiaohua patted his storage pouch and took out the consecutive note talisman. He urged his transcendence energy, and the consecutive note talisman let out a sharp whistle and flew behind Xiaohua. It's flying in the opposite direction. Seeing this, Xiaohua was very pleasantly surprised. Without the slightest hesitation, He chased after the consecutive note talisman's sharp whistle and turned around to fly. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, who were extremely far away from Xiaohua, were originally on the verge of despair. The true qi in their bodies had already been exhausted. Their faces were ashen as they prepared to make a final struggle like Fu Shu. However, they suddenly felt that their true qi was no longer flowing out. Instead, as their true qi circulated in their meridians, new true qi appeared. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew in their hearts that this seemed to be a turning point. Thinking the same as Xiaohua, they immediately took out the consecutive note talisman. Seeing the consecutive note talisman fly away, how could they not know that they had escaped? Desperately urging their last trace of transcendence energy, they chased after the consecutive note talisman and rushed out. In the time it took to eat half a meal, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian flew out of the clouds of Yu Lianshan from different places. Li Xiaowen was the first to rush out. Facing him was Fan Daomao, who was anxiously and somewhat pleasantly surprised, standing in front of the clouds. Li Xiaowen's consecutive note talisman had stopped in front of Fan Daomao. Seeing Li Xiaowen come out, Fan Daomao took 2 steps forward and called out, "Fellow Taoist Li." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Li Xiaowen's figure fell from midair and fell straight to the ground. The transcendence energy in his body had been completely exhausted. Li Xiaowen didn't have time to say anything to Fan Daomao. He sat down cross-legged, his palms facing the sky, and circulated his cultivation method to recover his transcendence energy. Seeing this, how could Fan Daomao not know? He immediately stopped and stood there, not daring to disturb Li Xiaowen. Just as Fan Daomao stopped, another consecutive note talisman flew out, and Sun Fian flew out from another place in a sorry state. Like Li Xiaowen, Sun Fian had just flown out of the clouds of Yu Lianshan when he fell to the ground. Then, with Fan Daomao's support, he went to a place slightly further away and hurriedly recovered his transcendence energy. Then, the clouds of the entire Yu Lianshan regained their calm, and no more consecutive note talismans flew out from within. Fan Daomao looked at the calm clouds, and cold sweat broke out on his back. Of the 4 people who went in, only the 2 with the strongest cultivation came out alive. The other 2 were probably already dead? Fortunately, I was quick-witted and found a reason not to go in. Otherwise, Fan Daomao suddenly felt a wave of lingering fear. He shrunk his neck and was about to walk back. But at this moment, from an extremely far away direction, another consecutive note talisman flew out from the clouds. Following that consecutive note talisman was a tall and thin figure that immediately darted out from the clouds. Looking at the flying speed, it was almost catching up to the consecutive note talisman. Xiaohua. Seeing that figure, Fan Daomao was immediately shocked. Xiaohua's cultivation was the lowest. How did he come out alive? But thinking about how Xiaohua could kill a 6th-level qi refinement disciple of the Feng family, it was normal for him to come out alive. Xiaohua wasn't like Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian who fell to the ground as soon as they came out of the clouds. Instead, he quickly flew in front of Fan Daomao and cupped his hands in greeting. "Fellow Taoist Fan, did fellow Taoist Li and the others come out?" Fan Daomao didn't dare to be negligent. He cupped his hands and said, "Let me tell you, fellow Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun just came out, but because their transcendence energy was exhausted, they're recuperating over there. As for fellow Taoist Fu, he still hasn't come out. So it's like this?" Xiaohua used his hand to pinch his chin and looked at the fog of Yu Lianshan from the side. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you want to go save fellow Taoist Fu?" Fan Daomao probed. Sigh, Xiaohua sighed. "Admittedly, I have the heart, but I don't have the strength to spare. Moreover, according to what I encountered inside, I'm afraid fellow Taoist Fu has already perished." The cloud mist beast was indeed frightening. It was 100 times more frightening than any opponent or demonic beast Sun Cheng had encountered. Although the Ice Worm King of Nan Kaiping was formidable, but he could still encounter it. If he wasn't a match for it, perhaps he could escape far away, or use some top-grade fireball talisman to deal with it for a while. But this cloud mist beast was simply impossible to guard against. Unwittingly, he was swallowed into its stomach. Now, according to Xiaohua's thoughts, if he hadn't coincidentally obtained dozens of marrow-cleansing pills in the space, and if he hadn't taken a lot of them within 6 hours and increased his cultivation by a bit, his flying speed would have surpassed that of an 11th level Qi refinement cultivator and directly caught up to that of a 12th level Qi refinement cultivator. In terms of speed, he had surpassed the Cloud Mist Beast's control and escaped from its body. Otherwise, even if Xiaohua could fly and had immense strength, he would have only met the same fate as Fu Shu. It was just that this fate was different sooner or later. Thinking of his own bitter experience, Xiaohua's heart was filled with lingering fear. How could he possibly dare to enter the Cloud Mist Beast to save someone? Just as he was speaking, Xiaohua suddenly felt his qi and blood surging within his body. It was something he had never encountered before. Not daring to be negligent, he cupped his hands towards Fan Daomao and sat down cross-legged. He also began to circulate his cultivation method and adjust his breathing. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for it. Chapter 1373. Xiaohua circulated his true qi through his meridians, and only then did he check his cultivation base. Xiaohua almost jumped up from the ground. The night before Xiaohua entered the fog of the Yulian Mountains, he had just taken 5 marrow-cleansing pills, and his cultivation had barely entered the middle of the second layer of the qi refining realm. In just 6 hours, his cultivation had actually advanced by leaps and bounds, directly reaching the late stage of the second layer of the qi refining realm. There was even hope for him to break through to the third layer of the qi refining realm. However, when Xiaohua suppressed his ecstatic mood and calmly thought about it, he understood in his heart. Although it had only been 6 hours, he had taken more than 30 marrow-cleansing pills in one go. This was equivalent to 10 years of bitter cultivation. In addition to the marrow-cleansing pills and other medicinal pills he had taken before, it was almost equivalent to 20 years of bitter cultivation. Others had used 1 or 2 years of time, but he had actually used 20 years of bitter cultivation to barely reach the late stage of the second layer of qi refining. This really made people speechless. Of course, he had used 6 hours to refine more than 30 marrow-cleansing pills, and most of the residual medicinal power was distributed in his meridians. The sudden increase in his cultivation base also made his meridians very uncomfortable, which was why his qi and blood were surging. Knowing the reason, Xiaohua was relieved. Following Shang Huaming's cultivation method, he refined the residual medicinal power in his meridians bit by bit, slowly stabilizing his cultivation base. Seeing Xiaohua, Li Xiaowen, and Sun Fian all sitting cross-legged and adjusting their breathing, Fan Daomao couldn't help but feel a bit irritated. As soon as the 3 of them left the fog, they hurriedly recovered their magic power and didn't say anything to him. Although he knew that Fu Shu had fallen in Yulian Mountains, he still didn't know who had sent the silk bag. If Fu Shu's silk bag hadn't been opened, even if the 3 of them escaped, their treasure hunting path could be considered cut off. They could only return to Jinghua City, with no possibility of advancing any further. How could he not be anxious? After wandering around for a while, the sky gradually darkened. Xiaohua and the others didn't get up, so Fan Daomao had no choice but to sit down and cultivate. Soon, the night arrived. Inside Xiaohua's space, the reverse light stopped rotating. Boundless starlight fell down, and starlight seeped into every part of Xiaohua's body. Along with the medicinal efficacy in his meridians, it was refined into his true qi bit by bit. The stars moved and the night quickly passed. When the first ray of sunlight shone from the east, Xiaohua opened his eyes, and a faintly discernible flame flashed in his eyes. Xiaohua opened his mouth, and a bit of sun essence was sucked into his body. Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm about to break through to the third layer of qi refining. Li Xiaowen's voice sounded from behind Xiaohua. Xiaohua turned around with a smile, looked at Li Xiaowen and also said, Congratulations, congratulations. Fellow Taoist Li's cultivation has also improved. It seems like you're about to break through to the 5th layer of qi refining. I am still far inferior to you, fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist Sun, your cultivation is also the same as fellow Taoist Li's. I really have to congratulate you. Xiao Hua saw Sun Fian walking over and also cupped his hands with a smile. Sun Fian bitterly smiled and shook his head. His face carried a trace of joy, but also a trace of fear. He said, although I've improved, the price is really big. They had just passed through 2 places, and 2 people had already died. The next 4 places, he didn't know how many people would survive. The true curtain of this treasure hunt hadn't been drawn yet, but the tragic deaths were far from what Xiaohua had imagined when he left Jinghua City that day. Why does it feel like this is a test of our cultivation? Xiaohua inwardly thought. According to what fellow Taoist Ma said, these previous operations were also like this. Could it be that some loose cultivators with insufficient cultivation were eliminated midway? And in the end, only the elites remained? Heaven Forsaken's method is a bit strange. But survival of the fittest is also normal. Could it be Heaven Forsaken wants to use this treasure hunt to wash away the dregs that joined Heaven Forsaken, only leaving behind the elites among the loose cultivators? And the goal of leaving behind the elites, is it the same as Jinghua City, to become a force of their own? Xiaohua was thinking a bit too far. Fellow Taoist Xiao, although Li Xiaowen didn't know whether Yu Lianshan's escape had anything to do with Xiaohua, in his heart, he already had a whole new level of respect for Xiaohua. When he spoke, he was a lot more respectful. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be sad. Cultivators like us go against the heavens and have the possibility of being eliminated at any moment. And loose cultivators like us are even more miserable. Fellow Taoist Fu's experience is also common in the cultivation world. Let's take this as a warning and pay more attention. And many thanks for fellow Taoist Li's reminder. Xiao Hua cupped his hands in thanks. Let's go, fellow Taoist Xiao. Yunshi Marsh is 5 days away from here. We still need to hurry. Fan Daomao reminded. And that's how it should be. Sun Fian looked back at Yu Lianshan with lingering fear. This place. Even if I stay here for a moment longer, I will still panic. It's better to leave as soon as possible. The 4 of them started their journey again and flew in the other direction of Yu Lianshan. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Li, I have something to ask? Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's no harm in asking. Li Xiaowen was very amiable. I want to know, from Jinghua City, to Southern Color Ping, to Yu Lianshan, and now to Yunshi Marsh, these few places, do they have any relation? How should I put it? I just feel that through these few places, we can find out the approximate location of our final destination. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly and looked at Fan Daomao and Sun Fian. This question? To be honest, fellow Taoist Xiao, I also thought about it for a long time. I presume fellow Taoist Fan and fellow Taoist Sun have also thought about it? Fan Daomao and Sun Fian both nodded. It's a pity. Looking at your expressions, I'm afraid you two have no clue at all, just like I, right? Exactly. Fan Daomao sighed. Southern Color Ping, Yu Lianshan, and Yunshi Marsh are originally a triangle. There's a huge gap in the middle. In this area, I also didn't hear of any special places to pay attention to. If it said that there's some treasure in Southern Color Ping or Yu Lianshan, I can believe it, but unfortunately, these 2 places are just passing by. The most puzzling thing is that apart from these 3 places, we still have 2 more places to go. Only the last thread can tell us the specific places. Where those 2 places are, we also don't know. I have 2 questions. Xiaohua looked at the quiet sky in the distance and said, one is, there are more than 100 loose cultivators in our Heaven Forsaken. There are also dozens of teams. Don't tell me, they also have to go through so many dangerous places? Alas, our country of Xi is vast and rich in resources. There are too many dangerous places. Not to mention Tingyan Yuan, one of the top 10 dangerous places, even Mo Zhao Black Forest, Yanlin Mountain Swamp, and other places are not much worse than Tingyan Yuan. It's just that they aren't famous. And there are even more dangerous places like Southern Color Ping and Yu Lianshan that even I, a loose cultivator, have the courage to enter. It's really easy for Heaven Forsaken to pick out some of these places. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly. Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, I have a second question. These dangerous places, even if they have their own characteristics, how can fellow Taoist Qing go to each of these places one by one? Moreover, only special spinnerets can be opened in special places. In the cultivation world, there are countless spells and magical powers. Everyone has their own secrets. Even fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm afraid he has spells that we can't reach, let alone fellow Taoist Qing. Sun Fian shook his head slightly. Xiao Hua still didn't give up. Southern Color Ping has ice worms and an extremely cold climate. Yu Lianshan has fog beasts and clouds that don't disperse for years. These should be the factors that activate the spells in the threads, right? What's so special about Yunshizhe? Maybe, we don't have to go to the truly dangerous places. We can open the threads in places that are similar to these places? Haha, fellow Taoist Zhao's idea is really interesting. However, it's not that we haven't thought of this before, but as long as there are places similar to Yu Lianshan and Southern Color Ping, there are also demonic beasts. The ice worms and fog beasts are only at the second stage. The other places are at the third and fourth stage. They're far from what loose cultivators like us can handle. Fan Daomao explained to Xiao Hua with a smile. Alas, so it's like this. Xiao Hua was speechless. It seemed that he could only follow Qing Fengmin's arrangement and take it step by step. Chapter 1374. In the next 5 days, Li Xiaowen and the others were extra careful. Nothing special happened, but the weather became more and more rainy. From time to time, there would be continuous drizzling and even torrential downpours, which slightly delayed their journey. During these 5 days, whenever Xiao Hua rested at night, he would take marrow-cleansing pills. Although each marrow-cleansing pill was only equivalent to 4 months of bitter cultivation, Xiao Hua's cultivation was gradually improving step by step as he took them one after another. In addition to the nighttime cultivation, Xiao Hua also stepped up his cultivation during the day. Even during the flight, he mobilized his true qi and circulated it in his meridians according to the circulation. Xiao Hua was only at the second level of the qi refining realm. This kind of cultivation speed was indeed a bit fast, but in Li Xiaowen's eyes, it didn't seem that surprising. After all, they also came from the low level of the qi refining realm. The second level of the qi refining realm was just the beginning of cultivation, so it really didn't count as anything. On this day, it was raining cats and dogs. Everyone used their defensive yellow talismans to form a transparent light shield around their bodies, blocking the rain outside. There wasn't a trace of rain on their Taoist robes, and they were as dry as usual. Hee. Fortunately, there isn't any thunder in the rain. Otherwise, today would be like yesterday, hiding in the cave and quietly cultivating. Fan Daomao looked at the dark sky and said loudly, It should have been a 5-day journey, but it just had to be delayed by a day. Counting with my fingers, we've been away from Jinghua City for more than 10 days, and the 30 days of the silk capsule's destruction are not far away. We can't delay any longer. Li Xiaowen nodded. Look, the silvery bright place ahead should be Yunshi Marsh. Sun Fian said as he pointed. Hearing this, Xiao Hua stopped the true qi circulating in his meridians and looked up. Sure enough, in the distance, there was a shiny place, similar to a small mirror. Why does it look like Yunshi Marsh is similar to Jinghua City? Xiao Hua asked curiously. It's a coincidence that I've come. Li Xiaowen said with a smile. Jinghua City has countless lakes as its protective array. The entire lake looks like a bronze mirror. As for Yunshi Marsh, although it looks like countless lakes, that's because it's raining. When the rain stops, countless swamps of different sizes will be revealed. These swamps will be shrouded in white miasma from time to time. It's far from what we see now. Miasma? Xiao Hua immediately thought of the clouds and mist of the Yulian Mountains, and his face paled. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be afraid. Fan Daomao had already seen this coming. He smiled and said, "The Yunshi Marsh is an insurmountable barrier for mortals, but for cultivators like us, it's a piece of cake. Even the most powerful water butterfly in the Yunshi Marsh is only a first-rank demon beast. Its strength is only comparable to a second-level refinement cultivator. It's extremely easy to deal with it." Sun Fian also said, "Most of the swamps within several hundred miles of Yunshi Swamp are ordinary swamps. Only in the depths of the swamp are there water pattern butterflies, so we don't have to be afraid." Seeing that Li Xiaowen and the others weren't afraid, Xiaohua was naturally relieved. In the time it took to eat a meal, the four of them arrived at the edge of Yunshi Marsh. At this time, the pouring rain had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly. If it weren't for the swamps in front of them, no one would have thought that it was still raining just a moment ago. In the swamp closest to them, the mirror-like pool of water gradually became lively. Countless water frogs, toads, water snakes, and other creatures began to swim in the water and began to hunt for food. There were also dragonflies and other creatures on the surface of the water. They either touched the water or flew to catch the tiny flying insects on the surface of the water or beside the water plants. There were also swallow-like birds that flew from afar and quickly slid down. They swooped down on the water, either holding a struggling small fish in their beaks or catching a young water snake in their claws. After the rain, the swamp instantly came alive. Fellow Taoist Li, this swamp is several hundred miles wide. Where should we go to open this silk bag? Xiaohua looked at the swamp full of vitality and felt a trace of joy in his heart. Soon after, he came to a realization. This is difficult to do. Li Xiaowen nodded and said, "This Yunshi Marsh is indeed safe and has no danger. However, the area is too large. I don't know where is the best place to open the silk bag. Let's go in and take a look. We'll go together. Just like in Yulian Mountain, we'll see who can open the silk bag." Sun Fian suggested. No one had any other ideas, so this was the only way. Thus, they flew up again, each holding a silk bag in their hands, and flew into Yunshi Marsh. Under everyone's feet was a swamp. It had just rained and was filled with water. At this moment, under the scorching sun, countless amounts of water vapor evaporated. Gradually, this swamp country became a land of mist. It was somewhat similar to Yulian Mountains. However, within this mist, there was a rather fishy stench that was nauseating. Xiaohua and the others closed their mouths and noses before daring to move forward. After flying for an unknown period of time, no one's silk bag had any changes. Looking at the water vapor lingering in the air, Li Xiaowen frowned slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Sun Fian exclaim in surprise. He pointed at the misty place in the distance and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, look, isn't that the Rainbow Epiphany?" Rainbow Epiphany. Xiaohua stared blankly. He had never heard of this name before. Following Sun Fian's finger, he saw that about a few hundred feet to their right, in the middle of the mist, there was a 3-foot-long rainbow suspended in the mist. It looked very blurry, but the rainbow color was different from the surrounding white mist. It was very eye-catching. However, if Sun Fian hadn't seen it, the others probably wouldn't have noticed it. This is the Rainbow Epiphany? What is this? Isn't it just a rainbow? It looks no different from a real rainbow. Xiaohua was somewhat bewildered. However, he also knew that this definitely wasn't a real rainbow. The real thing was hanging in the sky. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen's face also revealed ecstasy. His voice was somewhat trembling. Hurry, if we can get this Rainbow Epiphany, even if we can't find the silk bag and fellow Taoist Qing and the others, this trip won't be in vain." While speaking, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian both urged their magic power. Without even calling out to Xiaohua and Fan Daomao, they flew in the direction of the Rainbow Epiphany. Fan Daomao had obviously heard of the Rainbow Epiphyllum's reputation, but he was still half a beat slower than Li Xiaowen and the others, and his cultivation was also much lower. By the time he caught up, he was already more than 10 feet behind. Xiaohua frowned and used his finger to scratch his chin. Then his eyebrows raised and he very easily caught up to Fan Daomao. He asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Fan, this? Rainbow Epiphany, what is this thing?" Fan Daomao looked at Xiao Hua very enviously. Then he looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in front of him. Knowing that he might not be able to catch up to them, he said, I don't know how fellow Taoist cultivated before. You don't even know about this rainbow epiphany? Do I need to know? Xiao Hua's face was slightly cold. Cough cough. Fan Daomao realized that his words were inappropriate. He coughed twice to cover it up. Fellow Taoist Xiao must know about the foundation establishment pill, right? Nonsense, I naturally know this. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes. Do you think I's an idiot? Of course not, fellow Taoist Xiao. Since you know about the foundation establishment pill, you naturally know about the exquisite grass. The exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the foundation establishment pill. I naturally know this. Xiao Hua interrupted without hesitation. Fellow Taoist Fan, just say it directly. Why are you beating around the bush for no reason? It's like this. The exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the foundation establishment pill, and this rainbow epiphany is the main ingredient for refining the revolving illumination pill. Fellow Taoist Xiao should know how precious this rainbow epiphany is. Fan Daomao laughed. I don't know. Xiao Hua said decisively. Fellow Taoist Xiao should not know about the revolving illumination pill, right? Fan Daomao was flabbergasted. Of course I don't know. I hope fellow Taoist Fan can dispel my doubts. Xiao Hua's face was slightly red as he cupped his hands. And so it's like this? Fan Daomao rolled his eyes and said in a low voice, time is tight. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I's flying speed is too slow. I'm afraid I can't catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun. Fellow Taoist Zhao's flying speed is much faster than ours. If we can catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun and obtain this rainbow epiphany, I will not only tell you about the revolving illumination pill, but also how to deal with this rainbow epiphany. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao gives 30% of the benefits to it's fine. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. Xiao Hua looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in the distance, somewhat hesitant. Sigh. Fellow Taoist Xiao, with your fearful appearance, how can you survive in the cultivation world? Didn't you see that Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian didn't even say anything to us before rushing forward? Look again, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, aren't the two of them also quite a bit of distance apart? Aren't they also worried about each other? Fan Daomao stood in the air, almost stamping his feet. Besides, aren't we together looking for treasures? Besides the matter of the silk bag, we have to deal with it together. Normally, according to convention, it's whoever arrives first gets first. Xiao Hua's heart stirred. That's right, this rainbow epiphany was originally an ownerless item. Whoever had the ability could obtain it first. Right now, he was poor and had nothing. When he needed something, no matter what this rainbow epiphany was used for, as long as it was precious, he could exchange it for some cultivation method if he obtained it. Thinking this, Xiao Hua chuckled and said, Fellow Taoist Fan, wait a moment. Let's talk about it after I get it. As he spoke, he activated the flying talisman. His flying speed suddenly increased by several times, rapidly flying forward. When Fan Daomao saw that Xiao Hua's speed was even faster than before, shock appeared in his eyes. Soon after, a pensive expression appeared on his face. Although Xiao Hua increased his speed, after all, he had delayed them for a long time. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were both afraid that Xiao Hua would catch up to them, so they had already used all their strength. By the time Xiao Hua had chased after them for more than half of the time, the two of them had already arrived in front of the rainbow epiphany. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it. Chapter 1375. However, when Li Xiaowen and the others had just flown to about 10 feet away from the rainbow epiphyllum, a fiery red brilliance soared into the sky. Urgently, a young cultivator about 10 years old, with a somewhat arrogant face, wearing a light green Taoist robe, holding a leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand, appeared from the brilliance, blocking in front of Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian with a vigilant look. Fellow Taoists, please don't go forward. This rainbow cloud is something that my Blazing Flame sect has long since taken a fancy to. If you get too close, I'm afraid there will be some misunderstanding. That cultivator looked to be only at the 4th level of qi refining, but his bearing was extraordinary. He didn't give off the feeling that he was being looked down upon because of his young age. Ah? Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen saw this and stopped in midair. Xiaohua also narrowed his eyes and slowed down. Fellow Taoist, since this rainbow cloud, your sect has long since taken a fancy to it, but why don't you harvest it? Li Xiaowen reluctantly looked at the 7-colored brilliance not far away and asked curiously. This fellow Taoist. I already said clearly that this rainbow cloud belongs to my Blazing Flame sect. As for when my sect will harvest it, I'm afraid you don't have to worry about it, right? That cultivator coldly said. I don't dare. I only thought. This rainbow cloud is a spirit herb, there must be a spirit creature protecting it. If fellow Taoist is unable to harvest it, we can also help. When the time comes, Sun Fian said with a smile. Without waiting for Sun Fian to finish speaking, that cultivator decisively interrupted. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoists, I's 2 senior brothers have already. Before he finished speaking, that cultivator felt that he had misspoken and hurriedly shut his mouth. However, just this half of the sentence was enough for Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen. The two looked at each other and looked around. This corner of the swamp was currently filled with smoke and was a blur. They couldn't see anything clearly. The 2 senior brothers that the cultivator spoke of, they didn't know where they led the spirit beast guarding the spirit herb to. With such an excellent opportunity, how could Li Xiaowen and the others let it go? At this time, Fan Daomao also overtook Xiaohua and flew to the side of Li Xiaowen and the others. Quick, fellow Taoist Li Xiaowen, fellow Taoist Sun Fian, fellow Taoist Sun. I'll pluck the rainbow epiphyllum. You guys kill this little cultivator and we'll divide the rainbow epiphyllum equally. Fan Daomao was very agile. His figure didn't stop in the slightest as he directly flew towards the rainbow cloud. As he flew past Li Xiaowen and the others, he didn't forget to call out their names. If it wasn't for the lack of time, wouldn't he have called out Xiaohua's name as well? When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they couldn't help but reveal anger in their eyes. They originally had the same idea as Fan Daomao, but they were still somewhat hesitant. After all, the Blazing Flame sect wasn't a small sect. If their hands and feet weren't clean, it would inevitably bring about trouble for them in the future. But now, Fan Daomao hadn't even called out his own name yet, and their names were already heard by this little cultivator. Leaving them, there was only one choice. What made them feel the most ashamed and angry was that they were originally in front. Even if they plucked the spiritual herb, the initiative was still in their hands. However, Fan Daomao was one step ahead of them. The situation had already changed, and they had no choice but to listen to Fan Daomao's arrangements. However, as matters stood, what other choice did they have? No, absolutely no. Therefore, even though Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were unhappy, they still slapped their storage pouches and each took out a yellow talisman, throwing it towards the young cultivator. Seeing the 2 4th-layer qi refining cultivators attacking together, the young cultivator's eyes revealed a hint of panic. He slapped his hand, and the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand released a fiery red brilliance. It rushed down from the top of his head, forming a thin light screen in front of him. Just as the light screen formed, Li Xiaowen's icicle talisman and Sun Fian's hailstorm talisman shot over. The two knew the power of the Blazing Flame sect, so they used the water attribute yellow talisman, which was the opposite of the Blazing Flame sects. Kacha, kacha, a series of sounds rang out. Li Xiaowen's low-grade icicle talisman flew over first. Like dozens of ice arrows, it hit the light screen. At the same time the icicles melted, tiny cracks also appeared on the thin light screen. Immediately after, Sun Fian's mid-grade hailstorm talisman attacked. The fist-sized spiritual energy was condensed into a circle, and with a poo-poo sound, It hit the cracked light screen. The enormous impact and the sharpness of the spiritual energy explosion directly tore the light screen apart. Even so, the young cultivator only had a trace of panic. His left hand slapped his storage pouch, and a crimson-yellow talisman was taken out. He urged his magic power, and a fiery red flying sword suddenly appeared. It paused in the air for a moment, and then stabbed towards Sun Fian. At this moment, Xiaohua had already arrived behind Li Xiaowen and the others. He was contemplating whether or not he should go forward. Sun Fian saw his hailstorm talisman succeed, and his opponent's fire sword talisman flew out. He couldn't help but be somewhat anxious. His eyes flashed, and he shouted loudly, "Xiaohua, fellow Taoist Xiao, why haven't you made your move yet?" Sun Fian's move was exactly the same as Fan Daomao's. He wanted to put Xiaohua in a situation where he had no choice but to make a move. But when Xiaohua heard this, his face relaxed instead. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and on the contrary, looked on coldly from the sidelines. When Sun Fian saw this, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He really didn't think that his words would actually make Xiaohua make a decision. He actually didn't care anymore. Exactly. Xiaohua was originally in a bit of a dilemma. On one hand, he and Li Xiaowen and the others had gone through some life and death situations together. If he didn't help, he was afraid it wouldn't be right. But on the other hand, the Blazing Flame sect already had disciples picking here. Moreover, from what the young cultivator said, they already had 2 senior brothers who lured away the spirit beasts guarding the spirit herbs. They were only short of picking the rainbow epiphyllum. If he and the Blazing Flame sect saw it at the same time, even if he saw it a bit later, as long as he and the Blazing Flame sect were about the same time, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't hesitate. He would definitely fly in front of the others. But now, if he made his move, wouldn't it be the same as Zhang Jihao's cutting of the path and the 100 Herbs sect's ugly conduct? What made Xiaohua most disgusted was that Sun Fian actually wanted to use despicable means to force him to make his move. If, before the Feng clan's gathering, he probably wouldn't even pay attention to him, right? Now that he knew his methods, he wanted to tie him to them. How could he let him off so easily? Xiaohua didn't know what the revolving illumination pill was, but looking at the reactions of Li Xiaowen and the others, Xiaohua naturally knew the rarity of the rainbow epiphyllum. But if he was reduced to being in the same boat with such a repulsive person because of this spiritual object, Xiaohua really despised it. Thus, in an instant, Xiaohua made a decision. It was a decision that Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen couldn't understand. Seeing the flame sword stabbing towards them, the enchanting flames of the flying sword already burning in front of them, Sun Fian didn't have time to curse Xiaohua. He hurriedly retreated and grabbed with his hand, throwing out an icebound talisman, wanting to block the flame sword. That young cultivator was admittedly at the 4th level of qi refining, but his cultivation was still a bit lower than Sun Fian and the others. The icebound talisman hit the flame sword's tip. With a caught sound, a 3-foot-thick block of ice was formed, sealing the flame sword inside, unable to be used again. On the other side, Li Xiaowen took the opportunity to throw out an icicle talisman, hitting the cultivator's waist. A burst of brilliance flashed, and the defensive yellow talisman on the cultivator's body was annihilated. An icicle pierced deeply into the cultivator's Taoist robe, and blood seeped out along the Taoist robe. That young cultivator's complexion instantly paled, but he still refused to retreat. He clenched his teeth and urged his magic power. His face suddenly turned dark red, and more blood flowed out from his waist. Urgently, the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand once again emitted a brilliance that soared into the sky, then quickly fell in front of him. This time, it didn't form a light screen, but rather a large ball of fire, slowly rotating in front of the cultivator's eyes. Seeing that the young cultivator seemed to be stubbornly resisting, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian weren't moved in the slightest. Their eyes flashed with a trace of excitement, and they threw out the yellow talismans they had prepared long ago. That cultivator didn't hesitate. As soon as the ball of fire formed in front of him, he placed both hands on the leaf-shaped yellow talisman and pointed his hands. The ball of fire split into 2 with a twats sound. Following the cultivator's very difficult and heavy hand seals, it immediately turned into two raging flames, respectively rushing towards Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. The flames were very fierce. The icicles, ice seals, and confinement talismans Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian threw out were all turned into ashes in the flames, not having the slightest effect. This is bad. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen was greatly alarmed. He hurriedly withdrew, wanting to attack from other places, but the flames were very fast. Just as Li Xiaowen chanted, the flames rushed in front of him. Sun Fian was similarly alarmed. If nothing unexpected happened, he would really become a cloud of smoke wherever the flames passed. However, at this critical moment, the flames suddenly stopped. They quietly surged in front of the two people for a moment, then immediately shrank back and disappeared. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's faces were filled with pleasant surprise after surviving a calamity. They looked at the young cultivator from the flame sect, whose face was flushed, his body bent, and the robe around his waist was completely soaked in blood. Was there any need to say more? He was already powerless to activate the leaf-shaped yellow talisman. The heavens are helping me. Sun Fian laughed loudly. He slapped his storage bag and took out several confinement talismans, hailstorm talismans, and so on. He activated his magic power and was about to kill that young cultivator on the spot. At this moment, from under the clouds, where the rainbow epiphyllum appeared in the swamp, Fan Daomao's heart-wrenching scream came. Shortly after, an angry roar came from below everyone. Where did this rascal come from? You actually dare to have ideas about my flame sect? Quickly hand over your life. This angry roar was truly shocking. It was as if a golden bell had rung in front of Xiaohua and the others. How could Xiaohua dare to hesitate? He didn't even see who had come. He activated his magic power and his figure flew rapidly in the opposite direction. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.